And welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's been a long time, so let's just cut the chase. Week 14 was a blast. The coaching carousel moves have been an absolute blast. My apologies for not getting to you guys this morning, but we have about 15 to 20 topics that I want to get to, including covering most of the new coaching hires, reacting to some games from rivalry week that I couldn't get to. I want to talk a little bit about some other news, some non-head coaching moves, but just some of the coordinator moves today. Looking at Penn State's current job, it's rumored as of right now that they're going to hire Sitake, or at least they're entertaining Kalani Sitake, BYU's head coach, and that they've offered him supposedly a 6-year deal valued at $11 million per year, which would make him one of the nation's highest paid coaches. And we know that they have NIL and resources to also make sure that he has a competitive salary pool and can pay players and recruit them. It's not official though, and it's just rumored and they're talking. It wasn't like yesterday where it was confirmed Michigan State was going to hire Pat Fitzgerald. They just hadn't signed the paperwork yet. Well, they have, as of I think 30 minutes ago. So we're going to talk about that and some other things too, and close out with some lovely conference championship game previews and predictions. We'll do the Big 12, the SEC, and the Big 10. I could care less about the ACC because the ACC as a conference absolutely sucks. It is a terrible conference. It is an awful conference. The only team that I give a damn about in the ACC is Miami. And they're not in the ACC title game. It's a cool story that Duke and Virginia are making it, but I just, maybe this will offend some people, but I don't care. I don't. Like, neither of those teams are winning a playoff game. Duke has been a talented team. It's been a bit disappointing. Virginia has had a ton of flukish wins, and they're not even power rated inside of the top 30. I don't know. I don't care that much for the ACC championship game. But since I'm not going to talk about it, why spend any more of my time talking about it? I just wanted to give a brief explanation. I will be giving some more in-depth analysis on certain teams Wednesday and Thursday, but I just wanted to make sure I could get this out before other shows go live tonight and before my old time at 6 p.m. I really got to get to that 10 a.m. time that I want to. But I wanted to get out ahead as much as I possibly could. So we're going with what we have today with some reactions, some of the new coaching hires and what I think about them. And then we'll talk about Nebraska firing John Butler. We'll talk about Ohio State's surge in recruiting that I wanted to get to a week ago, just didn't have the time to do that segment. And also talk a little bit about Penn State's coaching carousel, but entertaining whether or not Terry Smith is actually a candidate or not. And speaking of a potential Penn State candidate, do you think BYU deserves to make the college football playoff? Let me know in the live show, in the live chat, because we will be talking about that. But I first want to discuss why I believe that Indiana has the obvious Coach of the Year candidate and why Curt Cignetti should win the Coach of the Year award for the Hoosiers. He's the best head coach this year, just looking at a total job. 12-0 with Indiana. They're power rated number 2 or number 1, depending on where you look. They absolutely dismantled Purdue on Friday night, and we're going to weave that into the conversation here, where Cignetti has just been absolutely phenomenal. I don't know that you could have asked for more of a turnaround. And actually, I do know. You couldn't have asked for more of a turnaround. You couldn't. Indiana destroys Purdue 56-3, and that's after last year's 66-0 shutout win over Purdue. You couldn't have asked for a better turnaround at Indiana after Tom Allen was fired. Curt Cignetti earned the Hoosiers their first 11-win season and 12-win season in school history. And they are 2-0 in the old Oaken bucket with a combined point differential of 122. 122 to 3. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? That means their average score against Purdue, and I know Purdue has been terrible, but their average margin of victory over Purdue is plus 9.5 points per matchup, points per game. This is the first time they've won back-to-back games against Purdue since 2015 to 2016, and the first time they've won back-to-back games against Purdue by double digits since 1987 and 1988. That's insane. And again, as I already mentioned, Indiana, they covered the spread. They're 12-0 for the first time ever. Last year, they were 11-1 for the first time ever. And with the Big Ten championship game on the horizon and the college football playoff on the horizon, Indiana, with Cignetti, has an opportunity to earn its first 13, 14, 15, and if they win the Big Ten title game and then somehow win it all, their first 16-win season in school history. It's absolutely incredible, the job that he's done. And just briefly to talk about this game, but we'll close out because I really want to get to Curt Cignetti and the overall picture for Indiana. Indiana had 10 TFLs. They had a sack. They averaged nearly 10 yards per carry. They were +2 in the turnover margin. Mendoza didn't even play well. He played pretty poorly. And Indiana still won by 53 points over a Purdue team that, look, was coming off a bye. Indiana was too. Purdue was at home. Purdue is a much better coaching staff and roster this year than they did last year with Odom. And Purdue early on forced a few stops, even got a field goal. It just didn't matter. This is one of the best teams in America, and they are so much deeper than they were last year. Their starters are more talented, bigger, faster, stronger than they were last year. And that's a testament to Cignetti. And as for both of these programs moving forward, for Purdue, the season is what it is. You were never going to bounce back quickly after that disaster that was the Ryan Walters era. I think Purdue has better days ahead. For Indiana, look at their schedule up here on the left-hand side of your screen. The Hoosiers are going to face an Ohio State team that is 12-0, that beat Michigan for the first time since 2019 pretty emphatically, and that has probably the most first-round talent, most day one, day two talent in America right now. And they're only 5.5-point underdogs. That's it. Only 5.5-point underdogs. Last year on the road, they were like 12.5-point underdogs. So they've closed the gap with the best program in America while having a team talent composite outside of the top 50. They controlled Oregon. They did to Oregon what Texas Tech did to Utah. They were able to stay enough ahead of Iowa and Penn State on the road to not slip up and hit their head on the corner of the table in those games. They depantsed Illinois on live TV. They handily beat UCLA, Michigan State, Maryland, Wisconsin, Purdue, and all of their non-conference opponents, a weak non-conference, but destroying them regardless. Curt Cignetti should be the obvious coach of the year. Like, full stop. There should be no one else you vote for. If you're a voter for the AP poll Coach of the Year award or the Paul Bear Bryant Coach of the Year award or the coaches, vote for the Coach of the Year award, whatever your vote is, Big Ten, nationally, Curt Cignetti should be a lock to win it at this point. He should be. This team is better in every way than they were last year. Special teams is much better. Offense is far better. Defense is better. They've done a better job scaling in games. And if you need any evidence for that, they beat Penn State on the road, and more importantly, they beat Oregon on the road. And Iowa is a team that's good enough talent-wise and improved enough from last year to where, Oregon had a hard time playing against them and could have lost to them in the same way that Indiana could have. And Iowa was able to destroy Nebraska on the road this year. So I'm pretty confident that Curt Cignetti is a top 5 coach, and I was confident in that preseason, but now I'm sure of that. He's definitely, in my mind, a top 3 coach, and someone who's competing with Ryan Day and Kirby Smart right now for the honor of being the best. He's made history in back-to-back seasons, again producing the first 11 and 12 win seasons for the Hoosiers. And I think they're winning more than 12 games this year. I don't think they're going to lose to Ohio State and then lose in their first playoff game. They might do one or the other, but I don't think they're going to end this year with back-to-back losses. I think this team is too good, especially with critical games coming up and having the additional day to prepare for the Big Ten title game, which really doesn't matter all that much, but what matters is getting that bye. More importantly, to prepare for the winner of the first round game that is going to advance to whatever seed Indiana is, whatever bowl game in the quarterfinal, then Indiana will participate in and be the host in that game. So likely, Curt Cignetti, I think, will win 13 games, maybe 14 games, and there's an opportunity for 15 and 16 wins there too. He's an elite game manager. Look at the Oregon game, how he handled the field goal and that special teams moment and that drive after Oregon missed a field goal. Look at the Iowa game where they had a very similar, middle eight type victory where Iowa was driving. I think they either punted or missed a field goal, I forget, but Indiana was able to drive down the field quickly and get a key field goal before the half. It was very key. And it also rubs off on his players, where his players are inherently clutch. He and his staff have developed the 74th ranked roster into a roster that is second in FPI, that is first in ESPN's efficiency, fourth in game control, that is top 5 in PFF's power ratings, that is first in Kelly Ford's power ratings, that is probably first or second in FEI as well. So the development is there. The fundamental soundness is there. They are fundamentally sound at all levels of football. They tackle well. Their special teams is disciplined. They don't turn over the football. They can run the football. They can stop the run. They are physical. This is a team that is at the level of Ohio State, Oregon, Notre Dame, Georgia, Alabama, Texas Tech, all of those teams that are up inside that upper echelon. And they won when doubted. That's another important factor too. Coach of the Year awards are often based on expectations and what you do with less. Part of the reason why Saban didn't win Coach of the Year all that much, even though he should have won it more, but he shouldn't have won it every year, in part because, well, he always had the talent there. Now, he's the greatest coach of all time, so I think in most years he probably should have won it, but you don't really have that anymore. There's no one right now as a head coach who's a greatest of all time caliber coach. There just isn't. So there's a bit of a void. And when there is that void, a great way to measure talent or talent in the coaching realm is looking at what they do when they have less or when there's adversity. What do they do? And Cignetti, last year, this year, people kept doubting them. People understandably were skeptical, and they have overachieved in all areas. So Curt Cignetti should be the obvious Coach of the Year award winner. And if anyone thinks otherwise, just tell me in the comment section below so I can tell you why did I do that again? Why did I do that again? Curt Cignetti should be the obvious Coach of the Year award winner. And if you think otherwise, let me know down in the comment section below, because that will give me an opportunity to call you rightfully insane and inform you why. I just think it's so painfully obvious, guys, that he's one of the best in he's one of the best in the business. Could be the best in the business, and he's coached at a high level. He's performed at a high level. He's won some big games this year. I don't know who else you could say is Coach of the Year. I saw a graphic on Twitter, I think 1 or 2 weeks ago, talking about how Mike Elko or Ryan Day should be Coach of the Year, and I'm thinking, what? Like, A, Elko just lost to Texas. That probably eliminates him from the conversation. B, Ryan Day, when you factor in nuance to recruiting rankings, has the nation's most talented roster. and Indiana's like neck and neck with Ohio State in power ratings. So in another year, it would be Elko, it would be Day, it could be Satake, could be Joey McGuire. I think this year it clearly has to be Cignetti. Moving on to some reactions from Saturday that I missed an opportunity to talk about. I want to discuss Texas beating Texas A&M. This was a program win for Texas, beating their rival in the Lone Star Showdown 27-17. And it's a program win because of how the season has gone sideways and how Texas is going to miss the college football playoff. The season in that regard was a failure. But they evolved and they grew and they looked into their own shadow, their biggest rival, their in-state rival, their most hated rival, a team that was competing with them for recruiting status, a team that had publicly said they want to be the flagship program in the state, and they killed them. Texas just kind of casually assassinated A&M. That second half was really something, where Texas was running outside zone for the whole game, and that resulted in a lot of TFLs and negative plays, but eventually they began to break off some longer runs. They began to wear on A&M, and you could see the physicality difference, the size difference, the speed difference. It was notable in about the middle 8 to the early third quarter that Texas was the more talented team. And Texas also had the better game plan. They attacked A&M's weaknesses, outside zone, getting Marcel Reed off his rocker, and then using outside zone to then attack deep against an A&M secondary that, as we've seen against South Carolina, as we've seen against Notre Dame, they are vulnerable at times to big explosive plays. And Arch Manning is the best quarterback they faced all season long. What a win. What a win for Steve Sarkisian. Doesn't discredit anything that Mike Elko has done this year by any stretch of the imagination. But Texas with a yardage advantage, with a rushing yards advantage, averaging 6.2 yards per carry. That might be a high for the year, though I'd have to go back and check that. And getting good enough pressure and having enough explosive plays through the air and through the ground to really keep A&M off their rocker. And then in the end, the two takeaways where Marcel Reed was forcing things and trying to play hero ball, and he's just not good enough to do that. Those takeaways sealed the deal. And that's how Texas won. A&M is consequentially eliminated from the SEC championship game. Texas was hoping for a little bit more chaos to reach the college football playoff. Unfortunately, that did not transpire. That did not happen. But I think the biggest takeaway that's positive for Texas is that Arch Manning is probably coming back next year, and he's going to be an absolute superstar. In this game, he had a 111.5 passer rating. I know that's not absolutely amazing, but A&M's defense is good enough, and Texas's offensive line has been shaky enough to where, with this game combined with the Arkansas game, the Oklahoma game, moments during the Georgia game, combined with their performance against Vanderbilt, he's improved as the year's gone on. And if Texas is able to figure out offensive line next year, and they'll return most of their receiver core, and Manning will get another year of development, I have no doubt that next season's Texas team will achieve more and be a better team in terms of power ratings and in terms of potential than this year's team was. Reed for A&M has also made improvements, but much like Manning, he probably needs another year to really, reach his full stride and potential and put everything together. He has a better supporting cast than Manning. Manning has more raw talent and is the better quarterback right now. Texas dominated. So in the second half, they outscored A&M 24-7. Score was 10-3, Texas A&M at the half. They did it with big plays, with consistent running. They stuck to their bread and butter, and they were kind of putting A&M on skates there. Manning was the best QB in the matchup, out-dueling Marcel Reed, as we just talked about. Texas also had this edge that I have kind of a tough time explaining. But the outside zone, the run defense, the passing game, all of that killed A&M. And there was just this energy with Texas and their players and their staff that A&M did not have. And I think the post-game press conference and how Elko was mad and constantly confused and frustrated on the sidelines, and his players didn't look amped up when facing adversity, tells me that they still have some building to do. They still have some kinks to work out in their hose. Texas does too, but that was not the case for Texas on that given day, on that given Friday. They played one of their best games of the entire season and finished out the year strong. They also had big plays. We talked about that already. Texas had plays of 29 yards, 35 yards, 48 yards, and 54 yards. Half of those were passes. Half of those were runs. They were, in that second half, generating big play after big play and scored on the majority of their drives. And A&M, something I want to finish off with that I think is very important. A&M's year is not a failure because A&M was never going to be a national championship contender. With hindsight. Hindsight's 2020. But their roster isn't quite there. Their development, again, remember, they're only in year 2. So they're heading in the right direction. I love Elko as a coach. I was high on them preseason. I thought their win total at 7.5 was way too low. They end up going 11-1, and they're going to the playoffs, and they'll get a home game. But for A&M, they have to continue to fix that roster and develop it and continue to recruit at a high level. They're just not quite where Texas is yet from a roster standpoint, nor do they have the assistant coaches or some of the star power to compensate for that. They just are who they are. They're a top 15, maybe top 10 team who is great, but they are not elite. As for how these team seasons went, again for A&M, highlight of the year is Notre Dame. That win on the road was huge, and their destruction of LSU, causing Kelly to get fired, blowing out Missouri that way. They've had impressive wins. They've had some scary moments, but this is a team that in the playoffs is going to be able to put together enough offense and enough pass rush to cause some issues for multiple of the playoff contenders and participants. As for Texas, it'd be the same thing if they could make the playoff. Unfortunately, the loss to Florida is going to hold them back. That's really the loss that will hold them back. Out of Florida and Ohio State, the Florida loss really kind of puts the crowbar in the wheel of the bicycle and completely derails everything. Texas just does not have quite the resume to get in one of those final seeds as a 9-3 team. They're not quite there. If a few more upsets and more chaos happened, sure thing. But while the season was disappointing, they ended up strong on a high note. They beat some really good teams, and I think Texas entering 2026 will be better than they were at the start and end of 2025. Briefly, we will talk about Miami and Pittsburgh. Very briefly. The Miami Hurricanes showed why they should be considered for a college football playoff berth in their domination, 38-7, of the then-ranked Pittsburgh Panthers, who fell to 8-4. Pittsburgh, there were people who were thinking that maybe they could pull something off here. And Pittsburgh needed to if they wanted to reach the ACC championship game. Well, Miami, they went up there in the cold and in a very sleepy environment, and they won by 31 points and dominated the game in a similar fashion that Notre Dame did. Very different, mind you, from that 2017 Miami team that went up at 10-0 and lost to fall to 10-1, then went to the ACC championship game and got totally derailed by a pretty overrated and limited Clemson team. Totally different. And that's because of some of the cultural changes that Miami has had under Cristobal compared to past regimes, and the fact that they are physical. They're not soft. Their problems have to do more so with game management in how they load manage or lack of paying attention to smaller opponents than it is they're just not physical and they're not developing properly. They have issues off the field or on the sidelines, rather, with some of their game management and Cristobal losing games that he shouldn't lose, but he's able to win some of the games that in theory they shouldn't win. Overall, Miami's in a really good place. Back-to-back 10-win seasons for the first time since, I think, 2002 and 2003. So Miami's definitely entering a better era that is the best thing and the closest thing they've seen to that early Larry Coker era, some of the Butch Davis teams, that it's an improvement. That's what I'm trying to say here. They dominated the passing game, the rushing attack. They had 4 sacks. They dominated time of possession. The Mario Cristobal quote that Josh Pate put on Twitter, I love it. That is a quote that I want to adopt and maybe even put on my background, or one day when things change, I'll have it displayed somewhere. There's no such thing as bad weather. There's just soft people. And that is a truism. That's a fact that needs to be preached more in college football. Pittsburgh had a quietly good season this year, and I don't want to take anything away from that. They weren't able to protect their quarterback that much. They couldn't generate much offense on Miami. Miami dominated the lines of scrimmage. Carson Beck played all right. Miami's offensive line and defensive line played at a high level. Shout out to Corey Heatherman for really turning this defense around. But for Pittsburgh, going 8-4 with a quarterback change and finding Mason Heinschel as a freshman who could be the future of this program, and having some wins over Georgia Tech and Florida State and going 6-2 in the ACC, I would classify that as a successful season by Pittsburgh standards, and they have an opportunity to earn that 9th win in the bowl game. For the Miami Hurricanes, I want to quickly say that this team should go to the playoffs if it comes down to them and Notre Dame. They have the head-to-head win, and they're power rated high enough in most metrics now to where they're probably within margin of error of Notre Dame. Where if they were to rematch on a neutral field, yes, Notre Dame would be favored, but they wouldn't be in a different tier than Miami, and Miami could win that rematch. More importantly, they have the head-to-head win, and in some comparable matchups like Stanford, like Pitt, I know that Miami played Stanford close for a half. They dominated Pitt just like Notre Dame did, but when you look at those final scores in some of those games, some games like the Syracuse game, Notre Dame dominated more. In other games from final score, Miami did better. So all that being said, these teams are close enough to where head-to-head should triumph, and Miami should reach the college football playoff if the final spot comes down to them and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. This is a playoff caliber team. This is a program that in the future, if not this year, will be reaching the college football playoff, and Miami is heading in the right direction under Mario Cristobal, and this game showed why. Oregon defeating Washington. Talk about a utter dominant performance that wasn't reflected in the final scoreboard. Oregon wins 26-14 with a lot of field goals and a big play that really sealed things when it looked like maybe Washington could steal momentum late. Shout out to Dante Moore for that amazing throw, and Malik Benson for his underrated speed and breaking tackles. It's phenomenal seeing his journey from Alabama to Florida State and then to Oregon, and I honestly thought that him going to Oregon meant that their depth situation was dire, and I think there was some truth to that. But they've developed him into a legitimate wide receiver that can make big plays and that is fast and gadgety and has good hands. And look, I think he's an all-conference wide receiver in the Big Ten. He stepped up when needed. Oregon covered the 6.5 spread. They move on to 11-1 for 3 years in a row now. Dan Lanning and Oregon have had 11-plus win seasons, 12 wins in 23, 13 wins last year. at least 11 wins this year with likely a 12th on the way, as I think whoever they host in the first round out of all the likely candidates they'll beat. Washington finishes 8-4. And look, I think that the Huskies had a pretty successful season, winning 8 games when last year they only won 6. Shout out to Jed Fish for hiring Ryan Walters, for improving the defense, for an offense that was so much more productive and dynamic than it was last year, despite having injuries at running back, on the offensive line, at wide receiver. This was just a matchup game where everything that Washington could do, Oregon could do, and usually better. The one shocking thing here is that Washington was able to really stop Oregon's rushing attack. They sold out to stop it. They did a good job stopping it. Part of that may have been and was due to the fact that Oregon's offensive line, I think, is still banged up after that USC game, and Washington has a better run defense than USC. But what's impressive about this win is that Oregon can win in a variety of ways now. They didn't need the rushing attack here to win. They just averaged 10 yards per pass attempt for 286 yards on way to a 400 total yard game, a 26-point game, a game where they were +2 in the turnover margin, and they converted 2 out of their 3 fourth downs, and they had 4 sacks. Their pass rush stepped up, where that's been something statistically that's been talked about as a lacking area for Tosh Lupoy and Oregon's defense. And they had a 10-minute possession advantage. So the Ducks, they controlled this game. They were the better team. DeMond Williams had some really nice throws with both of his touchdown, with his touchdown pass in the end zone on that 4th down. That was a beautiful, beautiful throw. Beautiful. But Oregon was dominating this game. He just got held to field goals. So the defense had to step up. Dante Moore and the passing attack had to step up. And they indeed did. And that's why they won and covered. Williams had an okay day considering the defense that he was facing. Washington's offense, we've talked about this on College Football with Sam. They suck at scaling against fronts that are at a high level that have future NFL players. So mostly that's Oregon and Ohio State. In theory, Indiana and Wisconsin. Michigan, I would also put in that theoretical category. Though after that Ohio State game, I question, along with that USC game, putting those together, I question Michigan's front's effectiveness, or maybe it's not the players, but it could be the positions they're put in. But especially with Ohio State and Oregon, who had to travel to Washington and play them, not host Washington or hypothetically match up with them as we were discussing with Indiana, they had to play in that Hornets' Nest, that's Husky Stadium, and they both dominated that game in a very similar way. Very, very similar way. Where the passing attack won the day against Washington's defense, and Ohio State's defense did a little bit of a better job bowing up in the red zone and the end zone than Oregon's did. You could also say that if Oregon were healthy, they probably would have had a more successful day offensively than Ohio State. It's whatever. Both of those teams are elite teams with fantastic fronts with future NFL players. It was pretty obvious to me that if Washington were going to win this, it would be because they were able to somehow contain Oregon's offense. And they just couldn't do that enough despite a lot of things going their way. Moore had another game where he looks like a future first-round quarterback and possibly round 1, pick 1 in that category. For Washington's season, really quickly, this was not a failure. In no way, shape, or form was this season a failure. You're insane if you think that. Now, was the Wisconsin win disappointing, or the Wisconsin loss disappointing? Yeah, that was disgusting. Was the lack of competitiveness against Ohio State and Oregon from an overall sense? Because at times it looked like maybe Washington could steal momentum or was live in that game, but they were never sustained for more than maybe a few minutes of real life and a few seconds of game time. Yes. Was the blowout loss to Michigan, now given what we know about Michigan, disappointing? Yeah. But last year, Washington was 6-6, a few plays away from maybe being 7-5, 8-4, but also a few plays away from being 4-8. At no point this year was this team going to have a losing record. None. The way that they were able to compete with Ohio State a little bit for the first half and how they were able to bounce back against Maryland in a rough spot showed a lot of toughness and a lot about their culture. They're heading in the right direction with Jed Fish, and they have a good recruiting class coming in, and they're bringing back DeMond Williams, who has a relationship with Fish and has been developed well by him and his staff. And Ryan Walters, that defense improved in a way that I was not expecting it to. So congratulations to him for not just putting together some good players in the backfield, but for really having that run defense step up and, force you to throw and kind of make every team they played to a certain degree play their game as long as Williams kept the football safe in his hands. For Oregon, this is a successful season. Preseason win total at 10.5, and last minute before the season kicked off, it shifted down to 9.5. A lot of people preseason, Bruce Feldman, my guy Baldfather Betts, a lot of people had questions about this team, and I understood that. Early on in the year, I had questions about this team, but I never really saw that it was likely for them to go less than 10-2. Because outside of Indiana and Penn State, I didn't see many teams that could beat them or that were going to be within a touchdown of a point spread against them. Even USC and preseason Iowa on the road, although as that game came closer, it became pretty obvious that'd be a tough task. But they won some close games. They won some blowout games. They have shown that even with all the injuries they've suffered, that they have depth. They have the appropriate size, speed, athleticism, and coaching to win in the Big Ten and to win a national title. If Oregon is healthy, look at this resume. You lose to Indiana, who could be the number one team in the country, at worst in power ratings right now is top 4. They beat a Penn State team that was top 10 then, and then ended their season, and they mentally crumbled. They were able to survive Iowa on the road. They were able to handily beat USC and be in control of that team despite all the self-inflicted wounds. And they won on the road against a tough rival in Washington with a lot of adversity and with things that didn't go their way. Like Oregon wants to get those explosive runs. They want to be able to grind you in the meat grinder, and they weren't able to, and they still came away with a double-digit point win. So that's impressive to me. And this is one of the few teams, along with, I would say, you got Oregon, and then the other teams are Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, Notre Dame, and Texas Tech, that I'm really scared of right now. And maybe we'll say the same thing. Actually, I probably will say the same thing about Alabama too, but being in that group of 7 is really impressive. And some of those teams, have lower floors, possibly, than this Oregon team. And if this Oregon team is healthy, maybe we'll look at the end of the year and say, yeah, this team has one of the highest ceilings in college football, and that's why they won the national title. There's a world where this team wins it all. But they have a lot of work to do. They got to get healthy. Thankfully, they get a week of rest this week, and they finished off the year with a win over their rival, which is always a very good thing to do. Speaking of which, same thing happened with USC against UCLA. What an ugly win, but what a necessary win, too. It was another test of character for USC to be down to UCLA, and at one point UCLA was putting together a drive. They get into USC territory. Then Nico gets sacked. They punt. USC is a scoring drive, and they effectively end the game. They retain the victory bell, which Lincoln Riley has a 3-1 record against UCLA. They've had some close competitive games. 2022 and 2024 were close competitive USC wins. 23 was a UCLA blowout win. This year was a bit in between what would have been a USC blowout and a close win. Overall, by winning 9 games, this is a successful season for USC. They have an opportunity to earn their 10th win in whatever bowl game they will participate in. And I am confident that Lincoln Riley is going to bring USC back. Now, will they ever amass the amount of talent that Pete Carroll was able to at USC? Probably not. That's just not the way the sport works anymore. But Will they be able to amass enough talent to win a title or to win a Big Ten title and to consistently play for a national title, participate in the playoffs? I certainly think so. They were able to fend off a UCLA team that really wanted this and hadn't quit. I thought there was a chance that after the Nebraska game, after the Ohio State game, after the Washington game, that they may have quit. And they didn't. They showed up here. They fought. They were competitive for 3 quarters. It's just late third quarter. USC was able to really start pulling away. And with their athleticism and physicality and speed and Riley's play calling, they were able to shut down UCLA and the Bruins and come out with a win. USC's preseason win total was 7.5. I thought if Riley just went 8-4, he would keep his job. Well, 9-3, he's definitely keeping his job, and 9-3 is that sweet spot where 8-4, you just be content. You kind of be like, at least there's improvement. Let's see what this recruiting class and new roster, new GM, new strength and conditioning coach are all about. 10-2, which is what I predicted preseason, was, okay, we're reaching the playoffs. It might be early, but we have strong indications that we're back. And at one point, I even thought 11-1 would be possible with this schedule. And I think in hindsight, it was possible. It just didn't pan out that way. 9-3 is not as optimistic as a double-digit win season, but it's more than 8 wins. You overshot your win total by more than 1 win. You overperformed the books. And USC finished the season top 15 across all power ratings. Depending on how they perform in the bowl game, they could finish in the top 10, and they're very close to the top 10 in that regard right now. Just briefly talking about UCLA and this reaction, they've hired Bob Chesney. Don't know if I'll make a video on that, but I think Bob Chesney is a wonderful hire. Respect to Tim Skipper, though, for doing a good job and for finishing with a 3-6 record, all of which were Big Ten games. That was a tough schedule. The fact they were able to pull off the upset against Penn State, dominate Michigan State, and beat Maryland was admirable. He definitely did a better job managing the culture in the locker room than Foster did and is a better coach. But UCLA at least cares enough about its football program to get someone more proven and a consistent winner like Chesney. Hopefully Chesney's able to find a place for Skipper on the staff, because what Skipper was able to do, I think you value that stuff at UCLA, where it's not easy to find someone who cares about the team and the locker room and the players and who's really passionate about this. Like, think of Chip Kelly. Like, Chip Kelly voluntarily left this job to be the OC at Ohio State because he got tired of everything. It's not a very attractive job for head coaches, for coordinators, for players. So having people that care and that can be cultural glue, I think that'd be a great thing for UCLA. But for USC here, I don't expect many staff changes because this year was a success, all things considered. I expect Riley to keep what he has, to build on it, and next year is going to be kind of a playoffs or bust year where if you win fewer than 9 games, or maybe even the mark is set at 10, you're out, or you're going to be on a very fiery hot seat entering the following year. The loss to Illinois, that's just something where in the future you just can't have that. And the loss to Notre Dame with all the bad decisions that were made, hopefully can't have that happen again. The only game on this schedule, which we called preseason, that you were really never going to win no matter what, was Oregon. And that could have been Notre Dame too if Notre Dame didn't have a bad game themselves. But you get my point. USC is just not quite at the level roster-wise that Notre Dame or Oregon are right now, though they're trending to possibly be there. But you can't have that loss to Illinois. Because sometimes you will have schedules, like I would say next year's schedule, perhaps, where you might face 3 or 4 rosters that are comparable to yours or better. And this year you really only played 2, maybe 3 with Michigan. You can't have those losses to those inferior teams like Illinois, even though I know it was on the road. So that's frustrating. And losing likely both Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane is frustrating. But with the good recruiting class coming in, a full year to work under Tremaine Carroll for the players, and Chad Bowden having another season, and this time really a full preseason, to work through these things and the roster and build it is really good. And for Riley to have a full year to fully focus on what he is best at, play calling and game prepping, I think is great. I'm really high on USC in the long term. I think Riley's going to work out there. And this game and the Iowa game and the Nebraska game and the Michigan game really showed me confidence where they were able to win despite adversity and not fold up like a lawn chair. This team is mentally strong, and they are improving in the physicality department, in the strength department, and they've maintained the speed and adeptness that we have been accustomed to Riley teams having. All right, that's it. That is it for the previews. We are out of the woods in that regard. Just got really bothered by something that was on my lip. I need chapstick. That's really what I need. I need chapstick. But before we move on, I do want to get to a super chat here. This super chat is from SFS Inverted, an Ohio State fan. And I just want to say again to everyone, but I think I alluded to this. Buckeye fans were pretty positive about my reaction and even my preview. Pretty positive about that, even though I wasn't I didn't say for 30 minutes that Ohio State's going to win it all by a billion points and go 16-0. But I think they were happy with the fact that it was pretty well known that I picked them to win, and they won. Yeah, and I'm a Michigan fan, as everyone knows, but I try to be as objective as possible. I think objectivity isn't really a problem here, although there are problems, as all of us have. SFS Inverted, though, he's one of these Ohio State fans that has been especially supportive of the channel, with super chats, with being a moderator, with being in my Discord. You can check out, I highly advise you if you haven't already, join our Discord server via the link in the live show description. It's free. You get to chat with me sometimes, with other college football fans. There are rules in the Discord server, so if you're concerned with it, as some servers are pretty chaotic, there's none of that there. We're all pretty friendly. The rare instance where something, not so good happens, we take quick action. And you get to talk to me about college football, the best sport in the world. So join it. But SFS Inverted has sent a $10 super chat, and I want to thank him for that. Great content, Sam. Go Bucks, and I'm glad Dave Portnoy is in tears. Dave Portnoy, I think an Ohio State fan in my reaction called me the anti-Dave Portnoy. Dave Portnoy is an absolute moron. I just want to make that a public announcement here. I have no idea why Big Noon Kickoff hired him instead of, Jake Butt, or instead of, Chris Drew, or instead of... there are so many, former players from both Michigan and Ohio State that I don't know their exact names, but I can picture their faces, and I've listened to them, and they provide anywhere from solid to elite commentary. It's just, there's so many better options, and Portnoy is the most biased, deranged, moronic, blobfish that you could ever put on TV to talk about football. I mean, I do not know as much about football as I would like to, but with my analytics and with my knack for picking games and for talking about weaknesses and my intuition, I feel like I could even ace him about football. And I probably couldn't do that with a lot of people. Really, really ace them in an obvious way. So he just... Dave Portnoy is so bad. He's so bad. So bad. We'll talk more about Michigan and Ohio State actually Wednesday. Not just that game, but specific takeaways from that game or from the season for Michigan, for Ohio State. Same thing with the Heroes game for Nebraska and Iowa. But thank you so much, SFS Inverted, for that super chat. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you a lot. That's awesome. I appreciate the $10 super chat. Any super chat you guys send, by the way, I have to answer it. I have to. And I usually do that in between my breaks. Emergency meeting for BYU. I was texted that by one of my key friends who has connections that apparently BYU's calling for an emergency meeting. I imagine Sitake is going to be Penn State's next head coach. I do imagine that. Let me see if there's any like breaking news. There are some flips going on. Nothing really. No major news. Just I know there's supposed to be some flips today projected, and there's still like the whole Sitake situation, the whole Penn State situation. So I just want to keep up to date with all that. But let's move on. Let's talk about some stuff with Pat Fitzgerald and with Michigan State and hiring him. Why am I pausing? I probably need a drink of water. So let's get that out of the way. That was refreshing. Michigan State hires Pat Fitzgerald as their next head coach. Only 24 hours, 25, 26, 27, really just a little over a day after firing Jonathan Smith. And it was announced quickly by the Free Press, the Detroit Free Press, and other sources from CBS a few hours or an hour after the firing of Smith that Fitzgerald was the front runner for the job and would be hired. The contract was just inked out today. I love this hire by Michigan State. Now, I know I said this about Jonathan Smith, and that turned out very poorly, but I don't think that Smith had the backing of donors and of the institution that Pat Fitzgerald will have. It's rumored that Pat Fitzgerald is coming with a $400 million endowment to the athletic department, which I assume would be exclusively used for football, or mostly used for football. That is some serious money, and we know that Michigan State, with most Big Ten schools, has major donors, but especially for Michigan State, these donors are very active in athletics and care. They were active with Tucker, kind of receded with Smith. It seems like they might be back in the fold. Just might. And if that's the case, I love this hire. If not, I still think they're more engaged than they were under Smith, and I think that Fitzgerald will get better results than Smith and better results than he did at Northwestern, where he had plenty of restrictions. Let me go through why I think this is a great hire. So most importantly, Fitzgerald did more with less. That is a hallmark of being a successful coach at Michigan State. Northwestern is the Vanderbilt of the Big Ten. Michigan State is the not Arkansas, not South Carolina, not Kentucky. What are they? No, the SEC functions differently, but just like kind of maybe the Auburn of the Big Ten. Would that work? The Auburn of the Big Ten, maybe the Tennessee of the Big Ten. Probably not Tennessee given its history, but like they're the Auburn of the Big Ten. They're a mid-range but upper mid-range program within their conference that has history, that has a right to have high expectations, that is a top 25 program in college football, and that earns a lot of revenue and has a rabid, engaged fan base. Not a perfect analogy, but just trying to go along with the SEC Big Ten comparison there. So he's going to have more resources, an easier avenue to recruit, to use the transfer portal, fewer restrictions. His fan base and boosters and donors and potential boosters and donors will care more about football and will more likely be engaged than those same types of people were when he was at Northwestern. That is the most important thing. D'Antonio did more with less. Perlis at his peak did more with less. Saban at Michigan State, they began to get recruiting going, but at the start, he had to do more with less. He inherited a pretty rough situation. So that is fantastic. Another part is he's a great culture guy. He was vindicated from that whole hazing thing at Northwestern, and his whole shtick, vibe, his aura, his message, whatever you call it, is blue collar, tough nose, defense, trench play. That's what Pat Fitzgerald is. The defense first, hard nose, tackle, fundamental soundness, special teams, being an All-American historic linebacker at Northwestern on that team that went to the Rose Bowl, being the winningest coach in Northwestern history and bringing them to 2 Big Ten championship games with defense and a okay enough offense to complement the defense, play complementary football. I love this. Really, this is fitting everything MSU not just has been, but also wants. I have talked about before that the donors from Michigan State are pretty weird, and they want this certain archetype. And I personally think the archetype is absolutely insane and ridiculous. But Fitzgerald is one of those options where he fits the archetype, but he's not an idiot. He's not ridiculous. He's not a meathead. He might look like one. The guy's built, played linebacker, and preaches blue collar work ethic, be tough. But there's a reason he was able to win the amount of games he did, pull some of the upsets he did, have some 10-win seasons. He's a sharp guy. He's as sharp as a tack. And it sounds like he's learned and even admitted that he hasn't handled everything perfectly. He doesn't seem like a high ego type guy. And that's something that Michigan State does not need. Mel Tucker on paper fit all of these other things, checked these boxes. But he had an ego and was selfish and had a lot of very bad off the field conduct. It does not sound like Fitzgerald has that after the report from the whole, hazing scandal and the lawsuit that followed from Fitzgerald, where he won a lot of money and they settled. Clearly, there was some overreach and definitely an overreaction from those reports about that unfortunate hazing that went down at Northwestern. I am going to give him benefit of the doubt that he's learned. I give a lot of these coaches benefit of the doubt with off-field stuff unless we know for a fact there are issues there. And I think that with the portal, with recruiting, with making good hires, I would imagine he gets that, especially with athletic director Jay Batt making the hire and vetting this and not, say, Alan Haller. The final point to make is that he's the Big Ten's Jonathan Smith, I think. He has more the personality fit with MSU than Smith did, but from a perspective of doing more with less and having a slow ramp up. Fitzgerald, I think it took 3 years for them to really have success at Northwestern when he took over after Randy Walker tragically passed away. Had to pull that one out of the back of my brain. Randy Walker, rest in peace to him. And for Smith, we'll never know. But the first 2 years were pretty much a disaster. The team quit against UCLA. It wasn't a good look. They really needed to win 6 or 7 games this year to keep Smith, and they could have in an alternate universe. They didn't, so it was appropriate to make the move. He is the Big Ten Smith with more personality, a better connection to Michigan State's athletic department and the people who found it and support it due to factors we've already talked about. Really, he reminds me of Jonathan Smith if he had more of a Big Ten background and was more well-known within the conference and by the fan base and respected. Keep in mind, Fitzgerald played Michigan State and D'Antonio and even Tucker a ton and beat Michigan State repetitively despite usually having far inferior talent and not being favored or picked to win those games. So Michigan State's very familiar with Pat Fitzgerald, and everyone in the Big Ten pretty much is familiar with Pat Fitzgerald in a way that, despite the fact that Smith did a very good job building up Oregon State, which also, is overshadowed by Oregon, does not have a lot of resources, etc. It's just Pac-12 guy, playing a lot of Pac-12 games, Pac-12 after dark. The hire was kind of sudden, and him trying to exit out of Oregon State being left out of a conference, just not the same familiarity, not the same excitement. Fitzgerald is going to be given, I think, a longer leash, but also more resources to operate with. So I wouldn't be shocked if, despite having a longer leash and more patience being built into the rebuild, the contract, the expectations, I wouldn't be shocked if he had a faster start and reached a bowl game in his first year with Michigan State. Another coach that I'm excited about, but not quite as optimistic about, is Lane Kiffin leaving Ole Miss to go to LSU. Talk about an absolute bless me. My apologies. Talk about a chaotic week. Really chaotic 2 weeks. Maybe we can even say 3 weeks. LSU hires Lane Kiffin. What do I think about it? He's finalizing a deal to be one of the highest paid coaches in all of America. In fact, he already has finalized it. LSU hired Lane Kiffin for $13 million a year for 7 years. A $91 million deal. 7 years, $13 million per year. He has a clause in his contract where if he wins the national title, he'll be the highest paid coach in college football. So the expectations are through the roof, as they always are at LSU. Kiffin's coming off of a few historic notes. In 2023, he won Ole Miss their first 11-win season. He helped them reach that high mark. In 2024, they went 10-3, and it was disappointing, but that may have been Ole Miss's highest power-rated team in their school history and one of their most talented, if not their most talented. This year, Ole Miss reached their first 11-win regular season. Only loss coming to Georgia on the road by 1 score. So Kiffin's stock, all-time high in his career. I think he's really never been a better head coach than he is now. So from that standpoint, there's a lot of good coming with this, a lot of excitement, a whole lot of potential. But what do I think about it? And what could some of the risks be? Because hirings aren't an exact science. Nothing is guaranteed to work out. Number one, Kiffin's an amazing play caller. So the offense always punches with any level. It can always respond. It's very reliable. He's creative. He can go against the best defensive minds in the sport. Kirby Smart didn't really do the same thing with Nick Saban, but Nick Saban's gone. But Kirby Smart's the best example and really do some damage to them. And look, his play calling is the biggest reason why Ole Miss over the past 3 years has won 32 games and only suffered 6 losses. Like 32-6 over the past 3 years due to a variety of things. Easier schedules, elite portal evaluation, elite play calling is also up there along with game planning. He's the portal king. That's something else with the, circling back to the earlier point of roster management and scouting and building a roster. Kiffin is many things. He is kind of his own general manager, his own game planner, can call plays, and is his own CEO. He's kind of a little bit of everything. I think this whole debacle with Ole Miss has showed how much of a control freak he is, which he always was. It's why Saban fired him. It's why he left Tennessee the way he did, why USC booted him out as early as they did. He's a control freak, and someone who I think is more of a control freak than a lot of college football coaches are. And to be a college football coach, you have to have that, type of energy, that type of personality with you. Like, not everyone's cut out to be that. Kiffin is, and something that he is better at than he is in his other qualities and better at than possibly any other coach in the country is assessing portal talent and getting it to work and win for him. Case in point, Trinidad Chambliss. Who would have ever thought that guy would be one of the better quarterbacks in college football? No one. Maybe not even Kiffin himself, but he got him on the roster and put him in a position to win and developed him to be a really efficient quarterback. He also has a proven process. The portal is not as talented as it used to be, probably never will be. And he has never been an ace recruiter, at least at Ole Miss. But does he have to be that at LSU, or can the kids commit to LSU because LSU's that big brand and they're able to lock down the state of Louisiana? For context, they have the second best recruiting class for the 2026 cycle in terms of average rank per recruit, according to the 24/7 Sports Team Talent Composite recruiting rankings. When you lead Ole Miss to their first 11-win season and then earn another, and it's their first 11-win regular season, you got a proven process. I don't care how you got there, if it's sustainable, if it is as sustainable as it used to be. This isn't Mike Norvell, where they have Florida State's best regular season since 2014, 2013, and it all falls apart the next year. That's not what this is. He knows what he wants in the portal. He knows what he needs to do to get what he wants. He knows how to develop and put players in a good position. He knows how to build a staff. His staff construction has gotten better and better the longer he's been at Ole Miss. He has a proven process. And what can win 11 games at Ole Miss can translate to possibly winning a national title at LSU. Another factor is the new energy. So Brian Kelly's geriatric. He needed to be replaced. He kind of sucked at his job at LSU, given the resources, the fact that he had Jaden Daniels, the fact that he had a defense this good this year. That win over Nick Saban back in 2022, that spurned a lot of people to think he'd have success. In hindsight, a lot of that, I think, had to do with some of Alabama's dysfunction at the end of the Saban era, and the fact that, yes, it is hard to win in Tiger Stadium. Also, Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels is a wonderful NFL quarterback when healthy. So, case in point. New energy, a more youthful mind, personality, and at this point, Kiffin's a better coach than Kelly. Retaining Baker is key, and it sounds like they have. In fact, I think that might have already been announced. But Golding, while he's respected and I think is a good defensive coordinator, 23 was okay. 24 was awesome because he had a ton of good players. This year, the defense has just been kind of is what it is. Retaining Baker at least will get you, I think, what Golding provided at Ole Miss. If it doesn't somehow, then you at least get a high floor. And it also allows for some staff continuity, and that might be important in the initial year. I'll talk about this too in my segment with Auburn, where Golesh retaining DJ Durkin would be huge, at least initially. So that is a good move, retaining Blake Baker to pair him with Lane Kiffin. I think this one will work out in the sense of making sure LSU is consistently in the playoff picture and competing for SEC titles and national titles. Will Lane Kiffin win a national title at LSU? I'm probably more pessimistic about that than most people are. That's a very hard thing to do, to win it all. And a lot of that just doesn't come down to roster, though that's the biggest component. Another component is coaching and game management. And while I think Kiffin can prepare an excellent game plan for any game individually, I wonder about doing that for 3 or 4 games in a row. But he can win a national title at LSU with the resources, the roster talent, with what he's done at Ole Miss. I just don't quite know if at the end of the 7-year contract, if, when we get to that point, he'll probably be extended, I would guess. But if we will look back and say, was it really worth going all in for that? And I don't know, maybe he isn't extended. He usually doesn't stay at a place for longer than 5 years. But on the surface, and from what I can tell, and when I dig deeper, this is a better hire and certainly an upgrade from Brian Kelly. Certainly. Speaking of Alex Golesh, it's time to talk about that. Auburn hires USF head coach Alex Golesh, and I think this was the best hire of the coaching cycle so far. Golesh is a tough guy. He is an ace scouter, a great developer. His teams punch above their weight class. And this hire is just miles better than hiring DJ Durkin, who was likely going to be hired, especially if Auburn won the Iron Bowl. Point one for why this hire is the one I'm the most excited about out of all the hires, with maybe the exception, maybe, of Michigan State getting Pat Fitzgerald. Number one, there's going to be no more ineptitude. Golesh is many things. Stupid is not one of them. Bad offensive mind is not one of them. Geriatric offensive mind is not one of them. Hugh Freeze was at least 2 of 3 of those things, and maybe 3 of 3. His offense has proven success. It hits the ground running pretty quickly. You can put a good quarterback, a great quarterback, an elite quarterback. As long as they're just average, they will have success in this offense. You will get to run the ball. You can run the ball power. You can be physical. You can play off of that. And Auburn has good enough players to where if they do some roster retention and, hold parts of this class together and use the portal well and bring in some key pieces from USF who play like they're Power 4 players, then I think Auburn could hit the ground running here. He punches above his weight class. And this is something that he's done all of his life, too. That's why, him and his family left Russia when they had that 1991, I think, military coup where they tried to oust Gorbachev due to reforms. It folds. The entire Soviet Union falls apart. Looks for a better life in the United States. Graduates from Ohio State. Enters coaching. And has risen to be one of the hottest names in coaching. This hire, while he was not Auburn's preferred choice, that was Sumrall or probably Durkin, at least initially. This is a much better hire than either of those, I think, when factoring in the expectations and factoring in who Golesh is. Look at the games where he's played Alabama twice, where he crushed Boise this year and beat a Florida team that had far more talent than his USF team. It's what he does, and we have a proven track record of that happening. He is an elite scouter. Why do you think he's able to win those games or compete in those games, despite Florida State, Miami, and Florida simultaneously existing in the state of Florida and recruiting it, and Ohio State and Texas and Alabama and Georgia also recruit it? Because he does a good job scouting. And that's important for Auburn because whether or not Auburn wants to admit this, they will forever be in Alabama's shadow, with maybe rare exception. It's the same thing with Michigan State to Michigan, which is why them hiring Fitzgerald is at least a good attempt. It's actually the same thing even with Michigan to Ohio State, even though Michigan's also a blue blood. Ohio State and Alabama are that good historically to where being in their realm, even if you are another blue blood, with rare exception, unless you are currently up and have a definitively better coach, you will be in their shadow. Michigan could beat Ohio State 50 times in a row, and Ohio State will still sign a better recruiting class because reasons. Auburn could beat Alabama 100 times in a row, and Alabama will still likely sign a better recruiting class unless they are completely dead and lobotomized. So being able to scout at an elite level and get some diamonds in the rough while also using their NIL and their resources to get key players here and there and to recruit in the top 10, not quite at Alabama's level, but maybe you match Alabama talent-wise by panning out with diamonds in the rough, then you're talking about, getting back to the playoffs, competing for an SEC title or even a national title. Auburn can win now. We've already discussed this, but just to drive the point home, they have Deuce Knight on the roster, who will be much better developed by Golesh than Freeze. Cam Coleman, Malcolm Simmons. I don't think Eric Singleton Jr. has eligibility, but maybe I'm wrong. Regardless, they have good enough receivers to where if they can retain them with how they've been able to recruit in the trenches. Like, say, Kendrick Falk doesn't go pro. They've had some good offensive linemen that have gotten NFL looks. They can hit the ground running and easily get to a bowl game within year one and potentially be a top 25 team next season. And last but not least, if he's paired with a good defensive coordinator, that was one of his problems when he was the OC at Tennessee, is that Tennessee didn't really have a great defense. Then in 23, they got a little bit better there. In 24, they had a really good defense, though a bit overvalued by metrics. This year, their defense is absolute trash. If he can have a great defensive coordinator with him consistently, so defense is not a problem, they will not just hit the ground running, but in a few years, they'll be a force to be reckoned with. I think that keeping Durkin is a wise move. Now, there's a part of, do you want, as Bud Elliott said in the Cover 3 podcast, as Josh Pates talked about before with the factionalism down at some of these southern schools, Auburn being one of them, do you want to keep the guy that some wanted as the head coach? That could very well matter. If Durkin just wants to be a DC and call plays and he's content with that, then at that point, I don't know if that matters all that much. Regardless, I think this is the best hire so far, and probably will be the best hire of the 2025-2026 coaching carousel. So Auburn, you hit a pot of gold, and I think within a few years, or maybe within a year, you will see the results and you'll be very pleased with the decision that your athletic department and athletic director made. Very pleased. A fan base that I don't know if they're going to be all that pleased is Florida. John Sumrall, former Tulane head coach. Not at LSU, not at Ole Miss, not at Auburn. He's at Florida. John Sumrall is succeeding Billy Napier as the head coach of the Florida Gators. And I like aspects of this hire. I really do. It's certainly better than Billy Napier. Certainly a better hire. Much more respected in coaching circles. Not had the same talent edge. Has played in big games against Power 4 teams and won in them or competed in them. However, I think Florida obviously wanted Lane Kiffin. They had to pivot from that. And while Florida is ready to win now, they have expectations of competing for championships, for the playoff, for even a national title. And I think that's going to be tough regardless of who you hire. So, not that I'm down on this hire, but I'll get to the fact that I just want to throw caution out there. While there's a lot of fan bases and programs, especially blue bloods, that should expect to reach the playoff consistently and win titles, Florida is in that conversation, but I don't know if they're deep enough in that conversation to where they should expect national titles right now, or even SEC titles. And I just don't know if that aligns with what the expectations currently are, and combined with the whole situation with Kiffin not coming there despite that being the dream hire, is there going to be a bit of impatience here? A bit of show me? Because I've seen a lot of Florida fans already complain about this. But let's start off with the positives. Sumrall's the epitome of toughness, which was also Napier's trademark quality. I made jokes about it on Twitter. It's grit and bicep veins. That's all Napier was, is just, flexing your muscle, showing that you have a bigger bicep vein than your opponent, that your players are huge and fast and well-conditioned, and we're just going to beat you by being meatheads. That's all Napier was, though. Sumrall's much more than that. It's important to have the toughness and the work ethic and the roster construction, and Sumrall checks all those boxes. It's also important to actually have a head and a brain and not to have the ego of holding on to play calling when you suck at it. Sumrall is also a great recruiter, but in a different sense, I think, than Napier. So Napier at Louisiana and at Florida, from a program standpoint, you have an edge. At Kentucky, being a great recruiter at Kentucky means that you're an ace recruiter, period, because I don't think kids inherently want to go to Kentucky. They're not really a football school. They fired Mark Stoops just recently, and Stoops is probably their best coach in school history or something. it's just not an easy place to win or recruit to. It's a job where coaches go there to eventually get fired, as even Stoops, a legend there, did. He was their best recruiter there, and they always played wonderful defense and won some big games there and had some successful seasons. So that's a positive sign. He punches above his weight class. So they usually don't win with elite quarterback talent. They usually win with defense, and this year, running the football a whole lot with Jake Retzlaff, their quarterback. Did not have a lot of success against Ole Miss, I know, but they crushed Northwestern, and Northwestern is a physical team, and they were able to, they tried to bring in some talented players. I remember they tried to bring in one of the old Oregon quarterbacks who was supposed to be really good, and that didn't exactly pan out. And then they developed Darian Mensah into a great quarterback. He gets poached, and Tulane, right now, is a 10-2 football team that is going to play in the American Conference Championship game against North Texas. That's what's going to happen. And they're ranked top 25 in the polls. They're ranked top 25 in the CFP poll. They had wins this year over Memphis, over Duke, over Northwestern. It's a lot of schools where, in theory, they have worse talent, and they beat them, and in some cases, they destroyed those schools. So that's a good sign, because while Florida is ready to win now, and I think Sumrall with this roster will have some initial success, and if he continues their pattern of recruiting well, they'll have even greater success. You're not more talented than Georgia. You don't have a better roster than they do. You don't have a better roster than Alabama. And with the SEC moving to a 9-game conference slate, if you are not at the top, you are going to need someone who can win these conference games despite having the inferior roster if you want to reach a 12-team playoff. Where I am skeptical is that they are ready to win, but he needs to be great. Auburn, for context, I feel like if you beat Alabama and win enough to get into the playoff, I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong because I'm not as familiar with the South as I am with the North. I kind of feel like the expectations at Florida, with not just their national goals and conference goals, which I think are higher than Auburn's but overall similar, but more importantly, the fact that I think Auburn is excited about their hire, and I don't know if Florida is. And I don't think Florida is going to give Sumrall the same backing that Auburn will give Golesh. So I worry that if he is not great, if he's just good, which good with the resources of Florida in theory, on paper and with their roster, should be good enough for him to be there a while. But I worry with the added context and surrounding drama, if he's not great immediately, that this could fail. Every hire cannot succeed. And this is just one of those where I look at Fitzgerald, that could fail. I have a very hard time seeing Golesh failing with Auburn. I look at LSU with Kiffin. I could see that failing, but more so in a way if he just doesn't win them a title and goes 11-1 or 10-2 every year, but doesn't really win them the SEC or a national title. And by their standards, that would be considered a failure. I could see this working, or it should work, but then eventually he's fired in a shorter order than a lot of the other candidates, outside of Ryan Silverfield, who I just do not think is nearly as good of a coach as Sumrall, and in a worse situation. I'm not skeptical because I think John Sumrall is a bad coach. I think he's a good coach. He could even be great. There's a lot of qualities to like about him. But with the situation at Florida, I think that in year one, he'll probably need to hit the ground running, because a lot of the vision was Kiffin's going to come and be with Lagway in this roster, and in year one we'll win immediately and we'll be competitive. And I think Sumrall can do that. I think he will. But if there is even the slightest hiccup, I feel like there might be some immediate negative pressure and energy there. Not predicting that to happen here, but my verdict is maybe. Lean positive because I think Sumrall's a good coach and Florida's a good program. but I'm not as confident as many of the other hires that I've talked about and that we've seen happen in college football. If he is just good and not great, long term, this will not work. And eventually Florida will be looking for someone else. If, however, he is great and the roster and the schedule and all these other things that with the super conferences need to line up sometimes for things to work, then this will be absolutely fantastic. So great hire. Don't know if it'll work out, as Tom Fornelli says, but it's certainly a better hire than Billy Napier. And I do think that you're going to see more than just 7 regular season wins at least once out of John Sumrall, if not much more than that. You'll see it. Week 1, week 2, week 3 for the whole year next year. You will see better game management. You will see stronger effort. You will see better development out of the players that Billy recruited and also had an opportunity to develop under Sumrall than you ever did under Billy Napier. Okay, talking about some more topics here. Let me see if there's any super chats that I need to get to. Doesn't look like it. Oh yeah, Joshua Perry is one of those names that I think Big Noon could have hired. Yeah. Just had to turn off my mic there for a brief minute. Let me check Twitter again for any potential coaching news. It's nice that we have the concurrent viewers we do. There's a lot of trending up in that category. How long have we been live for? I think, yeah, an hour 30. Pretty good. Pretty good. Oh, there's official reports that Satake is being targeted by Penn State. So that likely means he's going there. Yep. It very much looks like he's going to be their next coach. Whenever it's announced, I'll probably do like an emergency, like 10-minute instant discussion. So yeah, that's going to be big too for this one reason. BYU is like the Walmart Texas Tech of the Big 12, where they have money, they have resources, and it's a place where you can stay for a very long time as a head coach. And now that you're in the Big 12 with the resource edge you do, they should consistently be a playoff contender there, along with Tech, probably along with Utah, maybe some other schools in that conference. So, actually, with this news, so this might be moronic, but I'm going to skip this segment. The hiring hasn't been official, has not been made official yet, but it's is it official? Let me check. Look at latest. Huh. Yeah, I'm not gonna report on that yet, but we're also nearing enough of a deal to where I think that talking about Terry Smith as a possible coaching candidate is probably something that is not worth talking about. I actually didn't expect them. I didn't expect like any announcement or anything like this until after the Big 12 title game. So the fact this is like being made a thing now, kind of not exact, a little bit shocking. Not totally shocking, but a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah. Fickell is something that can be discussed here. Fickell. We can talk about Luke Fickell. Just want to grab a glass of water. Okay. So for all of you watching, just want to let you know that it's likely that Kalani Sitake will be the next head coach. Will likely be the next head coach at Penn State. Just letting you all know about that. But it has to be asked, has Luke Fickell done enough at Wisconsin to defend his honor and his placement? Have the recent wins, has the recent success, the recent buzz, the dedication, has that done anything for us to say that bringing him back was the right move? Was it really the right move to bring Luke Fickell back to Wisconsin? Wisconsin, ever since the disastrous opening to Big Ten Conference play, the blowout loss to Alabama, the blowout loss to Maryland, lost to Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State, then Oregon, then a win over Washington, loss to Indiana, win over Illinois, but then a loss to Minnesota, where Minnesota's now won 4 out of the last 5 Golden Axes, Paul Bunyan Axe Trophy. I'm going to lay out reasons why I think this is a bad move, and it just shows that Wisconsin is not serious about football. So the schedule, let's talk about that for a minute. They went 4-8. They went 4-8. And I don't know how to put it. But I know the schedule was tough. I do. And yet at the same time, to look that pitiful against a 4-8 Maryland team, to look that pitiful against a Michigan team that was not very well coached, to beat Washington due to turnovers and trick plays, to lose to Minnesota by double digits, and to beat Illinois because of their special teams mistakes, that just screams that Wisconsin is content with the current state of things. And it's kind of sad and pathetic, really. Again, the schedule's been tough, but regardless of that, only 4 wins for a program that used to stand tall and puff out its chest a bit and consistently win 10, 11 games, even at a 13 win season under Paul Chryst. And I know times have changed, schedules are much tougher, it's harder to build a great roster in the fashion that Chryst and Alvarez and Bielema did. Well aware. And yet, at the same time, at the exact same time, I just look at Wisconsin and think to myself, just how are you content with this? How do you think this is going to work? Recruiting is broken. They have the 67th ranked 2026 recruiting class. And recruiting under Fickell look, it improved. It did. Straight up. It did for the first few cycles. But now it's dead. And that reads to me very much like Scott Frost, where recruiting got a bump from where it was under Riley for a few years. And then after 2021, it just kind of died because, yeah, Frost was announced that he would be back, but he had to make changes. And it was pretty obvious to anyone that if he didn't succeed, oh well, your time's up, you're out of there. So there wasn't much of a guarantee of stability. And that's what's going to happen now. If Wisconsin doesn't right the ship, they don't right the course, they are going to implode. And now the rebuild's going to be even tougher than if they just jettisoned this thing after this year. It's broken. Fickell in no way, shape, or form has earned the trust of Wisconsin's fan base or of any analysts' faith, any college football fans' faith. This is his worst team, too, independent of schedule. Remember, last year they had a tough schedule, too. They hosted Alabama. They had to host Oregon and Penn State, travel to USC, travel to Nebraska. They had to travel to Iowa. The schedule wasn't quite as tough as this year's, but it was still extremely tough. Independent of those schedules, they were a much better football team last year than this year. And they were better in 23 than they were in 24. I think 24 in October, September may have been Fickell's best, but they quit after the OC was fired. Really read like that team quit. And they quit this year too. They quit against Maryland. They, I think, quit in portions of the Michigan game after an inspired drive that kept them in the matchup, and that got them excited. But if not for that drive, I think they're dead in the water. They quit against Iowa. They had no energy against Ohio State. Then after it was announced that Fickell was coming back, the players put some things together starting in the Oregon game and moving forward. But that doesn't matter. Like, yeah, Nebraska had an inspired effort in most games under Frost, especially after it was announced he was coming back for 22, and then they played Ohio State competitively. Didn't matter. Missed field goals, bad calls, and Ryan Day carpet bombing his defense. Didn't matter. He got fired next year. And the product and more importantly, because Frost actually kept getting better in power ratings, and then things imploded in 22. Fickell keeps getting worse and worse on top of the wins linearly decreasing. That's not a good sign. And it's not like Wisconsin is guaranteed to retain some of those young studs on defense or some of the players that are older on defense that might have some more eligibility. It's also not guaranteed they'll hit the portal and get good players even if they spend a lot, because the talent in the portal is less. The quality is worse than it was a few years ago. They have started to win a little bit, and that's an argument that I keep hearing. But really? Like, yeah, wins over Illinois and Washington were nice. It was nice for me personally because a lot of people were telling me that I didn't know what I talked about when I said that Washington's O-line is bad and Illinois is not a top 15, top 20 football team. And then, oh, you lost to Wisconsin, so yeah, I'm right, because Washington's O-line looked like absolute poop against Wisconsin, and Illinois hit the under on their win total that I said was a lock to happen. Was almost wrong there, and was actually kind of rooting for Bielema to prove me wrong, but regardless, those wins are kind of paper tiger, fake wins. Yeah, they're close wins. But when you win with those turnover advantages and your opponent's committing war crimes on special teams, if you did not win those games, those would have been indictments. And they would have been absolute, like, crowbar to the shin type moments. As if Wisconsin didn't already have those with the losses to Maryland, with the loss to Iowa, with how they looked against, Indiana and Ohio State, even when they put effort forth on defense, even when they had the trick play go for a touchdown against Indiana. I think a lot of those wins are fake. I think both of those wins are fake. And next year the schedule is much easier. But Nebraska's schedule in 2022 is also way easier than their schedule in 21. And they feel a little worse team, and the pressure got to the staff, and everything just cracked. Last but not least, and this really ties everything together, I just think Wisconsin's football program is dead. It's a dead program. And I think the athletic director knows that if he fires Fickell, then he goes too. And I think that he selfishly and understandably so just doesn't want to get fired and wants to be able to be involved and show that he's right. This is a dead football program. They have no recruiting juice. They have no juice. Oh, well, they, tried hard against Minnesota. Don't care. Minnesota's not a good football team, and they beat you 17-7. I don't care that you beat Illinois. I don't care that you beat Washington. Washington doesn't travel well, and their offensive line is butter on pavement in Florida. It's nothing. It's crust. It's easily broken. It's brittle. And for Illinois, they were overrated from the jump. Like they're not even a top 25 power rated team. They're just there. And Bielema's done a good job, but a good job for Illinois, not a good job for a program that is that has the potential to win a title or reach the playoffs consistently. So the program's dead. And I, as someone who supported Fickell, who said it was going to work out at Wisconsin, who is high on them in 24 and high on them this year, I picked them to win 6 games, picked them to win 7 games. I have learned my lesson. I'm not buying into this team. Not doing it. You shouldn't either. And with next year's schedule, going 6-6 shouldn't be enough. Going 5-7 shouldn't be enough. This team better put together a winning record, or even just get 8 wins with the schedule they have next year if Fickell is somehow going to work out. I do not think he's earned trust at Wisconsin. I think that recruits know that, players know that, coaches know that. Wouldn't be shocked if some of his coordinators, took a look at other jobs. We'll see. But it has not been good, and Wisconsin, by doing this, by extending him, has capitulated. They have officially said, we're not serious about football, and we are one of the worst programs in the Big Ten right now. That is what their actions have told us. And it's sad, because Wisconsin used to be an apex program in the Big Ten. But you know what program showed that they were serious? You know what program? Just texted my dad here. He texted me something important. You know what program showed that they were serious about football? Nebraska. Nebraska fired defensive coordinator John Butler today. And I want to quickly just go over some possible candidates to replace him because I know, Nebraska fans know this was a failure. And this was something, we don't always get things right here on College Football with Sam, but we hit the nail on the head more often than we crush our thumb with the hammer. We were right about this. This was a downgrade from Tony White, and temporarily earlier in the year, I thought that, maybe this would work, and I kind of abandoned that a bit. But preseason me was right. It was. The defensive front is too small. They couldn't stop the run. The secondary, as shown in some of the November and October Big Ten games, was pretty overvalued. They just had an easier schedule, so a lot of teams couldn't exploit that. And the defense overall regressed. This is Nebraska's worst defense under Matt Rule, and the offense just didn't improve enough for Nebraska to make a massive step forward like Rule and the fan base and the coaches and the players wanted to. There are big changes coming to Nebraska. I guarantee you there will at least be a additional coaching change to Nebraska on top of John Butler. Now, that can be an assistant coach. That could be Dana Holgorsen. It's not going to be Matt Rule himself, but there will be more changes coming to the Nebraska Cornhuskers. But let's talk about who they should hire next. I think that Jim Leonard, Mike Tressel, Joe Rossi, Ryan Walters, and the emergency break glass option would probably be Phil Snow, who's already on staff and was the defensive coordinator at Baylor. You could run the same system. He'll be more experienced, so you could probably get a better defense out of that. But I think that's you don't want to go there as your first option. Someone who runs a more physical defense, traditionally with a 3-man front, but 4 linebackers, 3-4, could probably run the 3-3-5, but upgrade it, would be Jim Leonhard. Currently with the Denver Broncos, former Wisconsin defensive coordinator from 2017 to 2022. This would be an A-plus hire. And immediately we could be talking about Nebraska having one of the Big Ten's best defenses next year. Immediately. A lot of these candidates could say the same thing too. So that's why I'm putting them up here. These are candidates who are realistic for Nebraska. Maybe not Leonhard since he is in the NFL, but a lot of these candidates are realistic. You'd be taking current Big Ten defensive coordinators, or soon to be former in the case of Rossi, poaching them from similar caliber programs and showing that you're a step above the programs that aren't Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, USC, and Penn State. You'd say, hey, we're not a top 4, even top 5 Big Ten program, but we're decidedly 6, and we're fighting to get in that top 5. We're in kind of a tier of our own, not tier 1, probably not tier 2 or tier 1B, but we're in our own category. We're leveling up to that top level right now. That's what pulling any of these names minus Phil Snow would mean. Rossi's defense at Michigan State last year dramatically improved from where it was under Hazelton. Started off very rough this year, but when he came down from the booth to be with his players, the defense, it immediately improved. Now, part of that was competition because he got Indiana out of the way and got USC out of the way. The best defense, the best offenses his defense faced all year. But there were legitimate improvements that were made to that. And they did a good job. Their D-line did, for example, against a healthy Indiana offensive line early on in that game. And they were able to hold Iowa at the point of attack in that line of scrimmage. So something I've emphasized with Nebraska is the 3-3-5 can be physical, but you really have to pull it off. You really do. Like a 4-2-5, a 4-3, a 3-4, either 4 down defensive linemen, or if you have 3, have the depth to be able to go to 4 linebackers. That is critical in the Big Ten. Think about Matt Patricia. Matt Patricia at Ohio State can run a 3 down defensive line, but they either run usually 4-2-5, 4-3, or 3-4. They never just have a 6-man box with 3 down defensive linemen. Why? Because run the ball at the point of attack, and now it's easier to do that when you have 5 defensive backs on top of only having 3 big-bodied defensive linemen. Plus, Nebraska doesn't have the athletes Ohio State does. An easier way to compensate for that is just making sure you have some bigger bodies, and the 4-2-5, 4-3 is better at that. That's Joe Rossi's defense. Mike Tressel, they have ran 3-3-5 at Wisconsin. He's ran a 4-down defensive line at Michigan State. This year, they've ran 4-2-5, 2-4-5, but with edges that are sized as if they were defensive ends. Very physical defense, very physical defensive front. Would love if he were hired away from what I think is a failed program right now in Wisconsin. I think he could work out at Nebraska. Ryan Walters, they run that 3-4, put their guys on islands, run a lot of man coverage. They're stout up front. I think that's what Nebraska needs in this conference. If they would have had a slightly worse secondary in exchange for having a better run defense, Nebraska would have taken that 10 times out of 10 this year. Would have really helped him against USC, against Michigan, against Penn State, would have helped him against Iowa, etc. So I think Jim Leonhard, Mike Tressel, Joe Rossi, and Ryan Walters are your top candidates for that position right now. Tressel's the current defensive coordinator at Wisconsin. Rossi's the current defensive coordinator at Michigan State. Walters is the current defensive coordinator at Washington. Leonhard is the former defensive coordinator at Wisconsin. I think the current defensive passing game coordinator with the Denver Broncos. Phil Snow is the associate head coach at Nebraska. I would not want to hire him, but if no one wants to be your defensive coordinator, which I cannot imagine that being the case, or maybe Matt Rule is stubborn or a moron, then you at least have him, and he's called defensive plays before. That's my assessment of Nebraska's defensive coordinator position. I think firing Butler, maybe some could say it's an overreaction, but I think that was the right move. Very limited experience. The secondary got worse as the year went on. The defensive front never really improved. Any potential improvements or anything that they were potentially elite at was all a mirage from scheduling. So this was a needed change. I think that Holgorsen and that is very different from this. Holgerson's instituting a new offense. Raiola got hurt. Rule, I think, wants Holgorsen to run the offense a certain way, and the offensive line really restricted how he wanted to run it. Defensively, with a 3-3-5, you will be smaller. Like, not that small, but you will be smaller. That's just a reality with having 5 defensive backs, and instead of having 4 defensive linemen, you have 3. Usually, unless you recruit at a super high level, which Nebraska does not, and they know that, you'll be smaller. And regardless of that, they were horrible. Like, they had a lot more going for them from a continuity standpoint than the offense did, I think. And the offense was the better side of the ball. So that was inexcusable, what happened this year for Nebraska's defense. Big changes are coming. This was the first of many. Let's see if this one pans out. But I think if they hire anyone from the list I provided except for Phil Snow, there would be an upgrade. Now we can discuss Ohio State recruiting. Well, you know what? Yeah, this should be discussed. So let's talk about it. Ohio State's 2026 recruiting class has continued to grow in size and in terms of quality over the fall. Ohio State's the best program in college football right now, and they are showing it, not just in how they're winning, but in how they are being aggressors in high school recruiting. A few months ago, they were flirting with being outside the top 10, and that would have been very concerning given that one of Ohio State's trademarks and a reason their floor is so high is because they almost never, if not ever, play in a game where they have a talent disadvantage, with very rare exception. They have not played in a game where they have had a recruiting disadvantage since 2022 against Georgia. They have not played in a game where they've had the inferior roster since they played Michigan in 2023. So a huge piece of that is their recruiting. And their recruiting class has been impressive with its run. Few weeks ago even, there maybe could have been some concerns, but it was still going to be a really good class. Now, if they hold on to everyone they have committed to them, it's going to be a dominant class. It's 6th in the 24/7 Sports composite rankings and 3rd in 24/7 Sports recruiting class rankings. From a quality angle, they are 5th when averaging overall player rankings, and that's phenomenal. Basically, they have a top 5 class, and they have 1 5-star and 19 4-stars. So 20 blue chip players, and probably some 3-star players that with their development and with their program could pan out in their favor. Their best player offensively is wide receiver Chris Henry Jr., 5-star. Sam Greer is a 5-star according to some sites at offensive tackle. Caden Dixon Wyatt is a 4-star, close to 5-star wide receiver. Crystal ball to flip to USC, so we'll see if they keep him. But, Hartline being the best of the best, I don't know why you wouldn't want to go there if Hartline is going to be there next year. And best player defensively is linebacker Sincere Johnson. People have compared him to Arvell Reese and saying he could succeed him in a few years. He's a freak athlete, has the size, the height, the length, the build to play defensive end or linebacker. Should be a tool in whether it's Patricia's defense or someone else's defense. Should be a chess piece to be able to move around that defensive front. It's been amazing watching them rise from like the 9th ranked class to the 6th, and their upside really, kick up as with senior high school football having been completed and being played, a lot of the players they got early on in the 2026 cycle turned out to be diamonds in the rough, who are now rated much higher than they were when Ohio State initially got their services. Ryan Day, Mark Pantoni, and Brian Hartline, Matt Patricia, Tim Walton, Larry Johnson. James Laurinaitis has been one of their ace recruiters. Carlos Laughlin's been a great recruiter. Tyler Bowen has been such an upgrade from Justin Fry. It can't even be overstated. Keenan Bailey, excellent recruiter. They are a staff of go-getters, of wonderful men, of quality leaders and developers and go-getters. So Ohio State's in a really good position to sign, possibly, when we look back and when we have 2020 hindsight, the best class of the 2026 cycle. If they can keep all that they have added, and while they have flipped a lot of players, hopefully not have any of their players flip to other schools. It's been incredible watching what the Buckeyes have done on the recruiting trail, for sure. Now I want to pivot a little bit and talk about why I believe Notre Dame can win a national title. And we're so close to being done. We're going to be done at like 7:15, 7:30. It'll be a 3-hour show where we covered nearly 20 topics, which is like a little under 10 minutes per topic. It's pretty crazy. It's like probably my most condensed show relative to topic size ever. And I think that's a pretty good thing. Make sure, if you haven't already, to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, be active in the live chat. If you do have a question you want me to provide a guaranteed answer for, send in a super chat, please. And I will do my best to get to that in a very timely manner. Just making sure there's no breaking news happening. Because I'm going to constantly be checking now with the whole Satake news. Oh, apparently Ohio. Apparently Ohio's coach is on leave. What? That's weird. That's really freaking weird. Wow. Well, that's not really relative to the channel unless we have any Ohio fans, but that's pretty strange. I bet you by sometime this week, or at the very latest this Sunday, it'll be announced that Satake is Penn State's next head coach. Just texting my graphic designer to make a graphic of that in case it's announced in emergency. Wouldn't be reacting to it on this show, but if it's somehow tonight, would probably react to it first thing tomorrow morning. Here's why Notre Dame can win the 2026. Bless me. Here's why Notre Dame can win a national title this year. The Fighting Irish are a team that you do not want to face in the college football playoff because they have a awesome run game, a fantastic defensive line and offensive line, one of the best coaches in Marcus Freeman, and they're red hot. They started off 0-2, but are now 10-0. And preseason, I thought this team would maybe miss the playoffs, and looks like I may have been right, but then they beat USC. They beat Pittsburgh. They won out. And look, I was wrong. They could get snubbed from the playoffs, but that would have more so to do with the committee and the bracket being 12 teams and some head-to-head stuff. That wouldn't be because they had too many losses to definitely be left out, which is what I thought. It's been impressive watching them rebound and the defense getting better as the season goes on. CJ Carr finding his footing. And look, Miami is 10-2 and they're 7th in FPI. A&M, I think, is 9th in FPI and 11-1. And they lost to those two teams by an average of 2 points. USC's top 15, Pittsburgh's in power ratings, I think top 35, top 30. They beat USC by 10. They dominated Pitt. It's been an impressive run. And Notre Dame, I don't think they totally control their own destiny. But if they do get in the playoffs, if they do, they can win it all. And they are a team that I would not want to face if I were a player or a coach. And again, as we talked about, the run game, which is elite. They are 9th in yards per carry, and at least when healthy, because I don't know the status of Jeremiah Love. I know Jadarian Price is healthy, but it looks like Love had an injury sustained to his ribs, went into the locker room. I don't know what that's going to result in. If he's, healthy like he was in the postseason last year, then Notre Dame cannot win it all. Like if he's a non-factor in that offense, then yeah, Notre Dame can't win it all. But I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt. If a player isn't ruled out, I assume they're mostly healthy or they're completely healthy. And if that's the case, then Notre Dame can win it all. The elite run game, if it's hitting, is their non-negotiable. It's their biggest one. And unlike last year, where if you took care of that, you really took care of the offense, there's some more dynamic factors with CJ Carr in the passing game that help play into this offense being one of the nation's best. But their strong lines of scrimmage is another reason why they can win a title. The offensive line, with Joe Rudolph coaching that unit and Al Washington's coaching the defensive line. I may have been wrong on Al Washington too. Ohio State fired him for, I think, very good reasons, thought that him at Notre Dame may have been kind of a joke, and it's never been a strong suit in the way that corner has been for them, or even linebacker, for example. But my goodness, it's performed well this year, especially as the season's gone on. And that's a testament to him and Rudolph on the other side, to the defensive coordinator, Chris Ash, to Marcus Freeman, and then offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock. Their lines of scrimmage are some of the best in college football, and that's important in the playoffs, where you're going to be facing tough, physical, big athletic teams, and you'll need guys who like the pain and who will push through it and be able to affect the quarterback or protect the quarterback. The defense has improved. Part of this might be a strength of schedule thing, in the fact that we've seen USC go on the road and really struggle regardless of who the defense they're playing is made up of. But I also think that when looking at the efficiency metrics, which they try to adjust for strength of schedule, there at least have been some improvements. I don't know if it's a top 10 defense like some of the metrics say it is. I'd like to see them play a offense that scales better than USC's on the road, but I do buy that it has made improvements as the season has gone on. And that is helpful, because let's say the defense is a little bit overvalued in analytics. Well, overvalued if you're top 10 means you're probably top 15, top 20. And with that run game and that offense, and with the physicality they have up front, if they can, say, be in a bracket where they don't have to play Ohio State, and Ohio State gets taken out, well, now your window is way bigger, and your margin of error is wider. Marcus Freeman is also a reason why they can win a title. He's 3-1 in playoff games. He's won close games. He's improved as a game manager. He gets better every year as a head coach. This year was a unique test for him because the schedule was a little bit tougher with the amount of big games they played where they did not have a distinct edge. He's went 1-2 in those games. Lost to Miami, lost to A&M. But he had moments where he could have won those games, and he beat USC. So with the 3-1 playoff record and the fact that he is one of the coaches most well known for covering the spread, I think that he by himself is a factor. And last but not least, Notre Dame's talented. They have a top 10 talent roster. And we all know that blue chip ratio is basically a prerequisite for winning the national title, with maybe a rare exception here or there. They check that box, and they're not just a blue chip ratio roster, which usually means you're top 15. They're in another tier where they're top 10 and their blue chip ratio is in the 60s or 70s, I believe. And they have their best recruiting class under Marcus Freeman coming in for next year. So big things ahead for Notre Dame. They might be able to achieve those big things and win at a high level this year, though, in the playoffs. With that run game, the improvements on defense, and most importantly, the lines of scrimmage, Notre Dame can get it done this year in the postseason. And there are many other teams who can too. We'll be talking about some of those, but firstly, I want to talk about why BYU, I actually think, should make the college football playoff. Kalani Sitake has been in the news about potentially being Penn State's next head coach, and BYU has been in the news for winning 11 games, for being in the Big 12 championship game, and if they win, they're in the college football playoff. There might even be somehow an avenue where if they lose and it's competitive, they're in the college football playoff. But I want to talk about why they should make the playoffs right now as it stands, barring something insane happening. Like head coaching change. If your head coach isn't going to coach in the playoffs, I could understand the committee saying maybe like, hey, maybe if they're on the fringe, that's a big enough thing to where we take them out. And maybe that'll get dislikes here. But I think Sitake is loyal enough to BYU to where he's coaching in the Big 12 championship game. I imagine he would be coaching in the college football playoff too. Like that's his home. That's where he's been all of his life, is in Utah, and he's coached at BYU for quite a long time. He's a big part of their culture. So let's just lock in the fact now he's going to be coaching there. And let's lock in the fact that they're 11-1, and that's not changing. They, by the committee's own criteria, should be in the CFP. And they should be in the CFP over Miami and Notre Dame. That may sound insane to you, and I would not have taken this position, but I talked to a good friend of the channel and someone who's more knowledgeable than me, who's smarter than me. And after him and I had a conversation, I thought, okay, yeah, they should be in. And the biggest reasoning is actually the schedule. So look at this schedule here. Like Portland State, Stanford, East Carolina, that's nothing special. I know the close win at Colorado was kind of disgusting in hindsight, but again, hindsight. They beat Colorado, West Virginia, Arizona, Utah, Iowa State, TCU, Cincinnati, UCF. Cincinnati, Iowa State, TCU, Utah, Arizona, all have winning records. That's 5 teams that they've played in conference that have winning records. Arizona is ranked top 25, and they're power rated top 30. TCU is probably power rated top 35 or 40. They're 8-4. And Utah is 10-2 and power rated top 15, top 10, depending on where you look. Texas Tech is power rated top 5, and I know they got destroyed by Tech, but often teams that are not top 10 get destroyed by the top 5, regardless, because of the almost exponential increase in talent from team number 10 to team, say, number 3 or 4. That gap has shrunk a little bit, but it's still a pretty steep curve that looks as exponential. And then when you get to like the top 4, maybe now top 5, it curves back and levels off a bit from 5 to 1. So those top 5 really tend to scale well, or not scale well, but they really tend to beat down those teams that are not quite in the top 10. BYU just isn't quite there from a power ratings angle. From a resume angle, though, playing Tech twice, that's a chore. And Tech is a team who can win it all this year. Beating Utah and Arizona is huge. Beating TCU in the fashion they did is huge. All of that results in a strength of schedule that is ranked 35th, ahead of Indiana, Ohio State, Ole Miss, Texas Tech, Notre Dame, and Miami. And they have the same record or better record in terms of wins and losses than Ole Miss, Texas Tech, Notre Dame, and Miami. They should be in the playoffs by that alone, because teams that have identical or worse records than them that are ranked ahead of them do not have the same strength of schedule, and that's more important than strength of record, which we'll talk about that in a second. But before that, they have 3 quality wins in my mind. Utah's a big one. A win that is just good, but not great. We have 2 of those. Arizona, who's 9-3, and TCU is 8-4. The quality losses component is the blowout loss to a top 5 Texas Tech team that we've already talked about is a team that can win it all. They are so good defensively, and you played them in their house to where they are basically a top 5 team, especially when healthy. And therefore, since you are not top 10 in power ratings in roster adjusted for performance, you're probably going to get blown out by that caliber of team. But the playoff isn't 4 teams or 6 teams or 8 teams. It's 12 teams. And 11 of those spots go to almost exclusively the Power 4. So is BYU, from a merit-based angle, a top 11 team? Well, I would say, yeah, they are. Their strength of record's top 10. Their strength of schedule's ahead of a lot of teams that would be competitors for some of those final spots for the road game slots. And your 13th game is going to be against another top 5 team. Same one earlier in the year, Texas Tech. And I thought that we shouldn't punish title game participants. Wasn't that the narrative last year with SMU being in over Alabama? Wasn't that the narrative? It was. And I actually kind of agree with that in a lot of regards. I actually agree with it more this year than last year because BYU this year has played a much tougher schedule than SMU did last year. Alabama, I'll say this here, Alabama last year had a stronger argument to get in over SMU than Notre Dame or Miami have to get in over BYU this year because of that strength of schedule difference and component. Also, BYU this year is probably just as good as that SMU team last year from a power ratings angle. So that then strength of schedule really takes over to compare the two in their situations. Ultimately, we shouldn't have a 12-team playoff, and I've said this before. It should be 8 teams or it should be 16. At 16, BYU's definitively in, and any team like them is definitively in. Because a team with an 11-1 record and a strength of schedule that tough is never left out of a 16-team playoff. It's just impossible. Or it should be an 18 playoff where BYU's probably left out unless they win. And in an 8-team playoff, occasionally a very strong 10-2 team gets in. But most of the time it's conference championship participants as half of it or a little bit more than that. And then really good teams that got left out and they're mostly 11-1 or maybe a really tough 10-2 team that had to go through one of the hardest schedules in America. In that case, BYU's left out unless they win, in which case they'd probably kick Texas Tech out of the 8-team playoff, or maybe not because Tech's power rated that high and was ranked 5 entering the conference title matchups, or now they'll be ranked 4. Now they'll be ranked 4 since they were 5th in the college football playoff rankings. But those are my thoughts on BYU and why they should be in the college football playoff, I think pretty firmly. Win or loss. I think the only factor that should keep them out to this point is they lose somehow by 50, say. Like really bad blowout loss, but more so than that, because what they did in the regular season should not be impacted by the conference title game. That should kind of be assessed on its own. More importantly, if somehow they don't have a head coach for the playoff run, then at that point, I could understand that. But as currently constructed, they should firmly be in the college football playoff. Firmly. Now we can talk about teams that no one would want to face in the playoffs. Then we'll get to our previews and our predictions, and we will get right on out of here. Here are 6 teams that no one wants to play in the college football playoff. These are teams that can, A, win it all, and B, dominate any opponent in any game, depending on how their opponent enters the game and how they play. That's what this is. The 6 teams that no one wants to face in the college football playoff are all elite, all of whom have great coaching, all of them are talented, and each have their own non-negotiable. I strongly believe it's going to be these 6 teams plus maybe Alabama who can win it all. But let's just get right to it. Sorry for the mess up there. The 6 teams that no one wants to face in the college football playoff. All of them, don't know why I'm tripping over myself. Hold on. Not the greatest with words, but this is unusual. Which college football playoff teams do you think no one wants to face? Let me know down below. The 6 teams who no one wants to face in the college football playoff are Indiana, Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, Notre Dame, and Texas Tech. And I want to go through each one, dedicate some time to them, and explain why no one wants to play them. Let's start off with Indiana. Indiana, out of this bunch, is my favorite team for a variety of reasons. Not in the sense that I'm biased toward them, but in the sense that I think they are the scariest within context. Indiana is strong at every position when healthy. They do not have any weaknesses. Again, when healthy. That is a big if. They, when healthy, have a higher floor than anyone. But the floor really begins to drop off when they start sustaining injuries, especially at the most important positions. So offensive line, for example, where injuries are the most common compared to any position. Their current FPI rating is 2nd. They're only a 10th of a point behind Ohio State, and they're a 5th of a point ahead of Ohio State in ESPN's efficiency metrics. Their points per play, their expected points added per play, their per play efficiency rating. What makes Indiana so special is, again, their floor is the highest in football when healthy. Their ceiling when healthy is also very high, probably not as high as Ohio State or some of these other teams that we'll talk about, but certainly Ohio State. Regardless of that, though, having a high floor on top of, I would say, this year, the best staff in America is very important for a playoff game setting, especially in a individual game, maybe not a series of games, because that especially factors in depth and you'll likely suffer injuries. And depending on what that is, that could cripple Indiana. But from an individual game standpoint, if you are a team and you want to advance really far in the playoffs and you want to have some guarantees and be able to, get that dominant playoff win, to face an opponent you're not scared of, Indiana's probably the last team on that list when healthy. I love their staff, their offense, their defense. They know how to generate a pass rush. They, outside of Ohio State, probably will have the best linebackers in the playoff. And while Ohio State's linebackers are more athletic than Indiana's are, Indiana's are used just about as well as Ohio State's. And I would say they tackle just about as well as Ohio State's do. Their defensive line is incredible. Their offensive line, when healthy, is among one of the best in the playoffs as well. And that's including Oregon, that's including Notre Dame, whose trench play is up there, and Miami, if they're able to make it. Another team to discuss, Texas Tech. Texas Tech, most people would not put on such a list, but they can win it all. Their efficiency rating is 3rd. Their FPI rating is 5th. The only thing that holds them down is priors in power ratings, even more so than Indiana, because Indiana was top 10 last year. Their defensive coordinator, Sheil Wood, commands the most explosive defense in America. Quarterback, when healthy, is a strength. Their rushing attack and their entire defense is just full of weapons and fantastic players. Their one loss to Arizona State was a close loss where everything went wrong for them. They played their backup quarterback, and they nearly won that game. They've dominated every other opponent in 11 out of 12 of their games, all of which were wins, obviously, because they dominated their opponents. This is one of the best teams in America. And what is scary about Texas Tech is they have the best defensive line by a mile in the country. No one compares to it. You say Indiana's does because of numbers. Well, they do not have the NFL talent. You say Ohio State's does due to the NFL talent, but they don't have the numbers. And a big part of the reason why Ohio State, has that explosiveness up front is they can put their secondary on an island. And they have two day one, day two linebackers. Texas Tech is a good elite college linebacker in Jacob Rodriguez, but they do not have that duo Ohio State does. Their D-line, independent of any supporting cast, is the nation's best, especially their edge players, especially them. Any offensive line would struggle against this defensive line. No offensive line would move this defensive line 5 yards back, 4 yards back, maybe even less than that. It is an absolute non-negotiable. It might be the biggest non-negotiable in the college football playoff. Might be. But Ohio State's wide receiver room would have something to say about that. And as the number one team in power ratings, number two in ESPN's efficiency metrics, their staff is elite. Their quarterback's elite. Their entire roster really is elite. The only position that is less than desirable is special teams. And then tight end and offensive line, while I would say good, great, are units that do have a floor to them. Ohio State's O-line has I would say great ceiling and just kind of like meh floor to it. Their tight end group, I would say great ceiling, sometimes can have a meh floor. Both performed very well against Michigan. Both have had other games that are less than desirable. The defense, though, has always been elite from the jump. If you want to sector the offensive line into different positions, tackle has been pretty much good at the very worst to elite at best. And running back has come on for them. But their biggest non-negotiable will always be wide receiver. It always will be. Even if other positions on paper are performing better, with Hartline there as the receivers coach, especially with Smith there, wide receiver will always be their biggest non-negotiable, and there will be no other position that will match it. There just won't be. And with them healthy and playing well, I just don't know which secondary is going to lock those guys down. You can't. You can only slow them down. And even then, I would question if you can do that. And that's what makes Ohio State so scary, is if you match up with them well enough, they might not be as scary as a healthy IU, where if IU's totally healthy, their floor is so high that you just won't match up with them well at all. You'll just have to straight up beat them. But Ohio State, with how ridiculously good those receivers are, especially since they're the number one power-rated team, could also be in that same category, where even if, say, you're Tech, and your D-line in theory should wreck that offensive line, will it matter? Because your offensive line will also be wrecked by Ohio State's D-line, and they have the quarterback and receiver play to compensate for that. You don't, and they have a depth edge over you. So you will, you do not want to play Ohio State. You don't. And I think these three are kind of in their own category. Where Tech with their D-line would scare any offense. Ohio State, period, scares everyone. In Indiana, when you factor in the fact they've been able to punch above their weight class and were able to control a team who's fourth in national title odds, if healthy, that challenge is so unique that I don't know how you prepare for that. But these next teams are also pretty intimidating and scary. Oregon. Similar to IU, where if healthy, they're very intimidating. But they're so banged up, and we don't know how long-term those are, to where you can't quite give them that same floor that IU has, where it seems like IU is getting all of their key players back. They do, however, in comparison to, say, Texas Tech and Indiana, have that talent ceiling where those two teams might lack that's more similar to an Ohio State, Georgia, Notre Dame, or Alabama. Dante Morris played like a first-round quarterback at times. The receivers, when healthy, have looked pretty good. Kenyon Sadiq is a freak. When healthy, the offensive line, I think, is the best in America. And this is a top 5 defense, top 10 at the very worst. They're 4th in ESPN's efficiency metrics, 4th in FPI, tied with Notre Dame with that 25 power rating. And I think that Dan Lanning's a hell of a coach. I understand that in big games he hasn't been the most successful, but then again, who is, outside of Kirby Smart and recently joining the party is Ryan Day? And a lot of that has to do with peaking. Like, Kirby Smart was his best in big games and fielded his best teams when he had Brock Bowers and when he had Jalen Carter, for example, and Trayvon Walker and, Nolan Smith. And for Jordan Davis, almost forgot that massive defensive tackle. When he had those freaks, those were his best teams. Ohio State is peaking right now because they have a centennial wide receiver and maybe their best safety in program history. Those things don't last forever. Didn't for Georgia, it won't for Ohio State. For Oregon, they have not yet had that, and maybe they won't ever. It's hard to have those type of players. Not every program has those, but they have not peaked yet. They aren't peaking right now. But with the classes they've brought in, and if they're able to get healthy, and especially for the quarterfinals moving on, maybe they'll be peaking just much later than anyone is used to the national champion peaking, and they could go on a run and win it all. I would not want to face Oregon if they're not banged up. Now, if they are banged up, they could be food. They could be, depending on which team they're playing. They could be the hunted rather than the hunter. It's the same thing with Notre Dame. If Jeremiah Love is out, this team can't win it all. Like, they're non-negotiables. They're running backs. It's not even the O-line, which is awesome. It's not any part of the defense outside of maybe Leonard Moore at corner. It's all of that, but with the fact that it's so hard to stop that running back duo, that they're guaranteed a high floor of points and of TOP and ball control when healthy, where they affect how a defense plans. Now, if it's just Jadarian Price and Love is out with that injury, that changes everything. And now you can game plan for the offense differently. And at that point, I don't think Notre Dame can win it all. But I'm assuming he's going to be healthy. We've talked a lot about health here with these teams. And really outside of Ohio State and Texas Tech had some issues with health, but it seems like those are cleared up. Indiana's might be cleared up. Oregon's and Notre Dame's, we have no idea right now, but I'm going to give them some benefit of the doubt. Notre Dame, with that running back attack, with how they have improved on offense throughout the year and on defense, it feels like they're improving at the right time. And Leonard Moore is a stud. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are studs. Carr could be a future stud. Rudolph is one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. They could be intimidating to face, not in the same sense as Ohio State, who could just straight up dominate you, or Texas Tech that could sack your QB into oblivion, or Indiana, who could put together the perfect game plan, and through that, and being the most fundamentally sound team with one of the best rushing attacks in this playoff, maybe even the best if you want to look at balance, then they could defeat you handily and blow you out. Notre Dame's is more so in the way that they've been here before, and they've won close games, and they know how to win close games. They know how to eke things out. And unlike last year, they're more multiple on offense because now they have a quarterback who can throw a forward pass 40 times a game if need be and not have a massive drop-off. Georgia is the last team on here. From a power ratings angle, they're the worst team on this list by a mile. But part of that is probably due to their style of play and the fact that they like to load manage against the small teams and their strength of schedule. They have a tougher strength of schedule than anyone on this list, minus like maybe Oregon. They might be with Oregon in strength of schedule, but it's a tougher schedule than Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas Tech, or Indiana have faced that Georgia has played. Smart, until further notice, I still believe is the nation's best head coach. And I'm not coming off of that. That is what makes Georgia scary. Very much like Indiana, in my perspective, but more so just straight up head coach and then the defense angle, where they can throw different looks at you defensively, and offensively it's similar to Notre Dame, where that rushing attack, when it's going, is very consistent, and they have a quarterback who can keep the football safe and do enough through the air to keep them on schedule. Don't want to talk about Georgia much more than that, because when you look at the metrics, they, in theory, aren't scary. But take a bit of a human component, adjust for some things, adjust for the fact that I think outside of Indiana over Oregon, they have the nation's most impressive win over Texas in the fashion they dominated that game, and just ask yourself, would you want to play Kirby Smart? Would you really want that? Maybe in theory you do, but after you play them and maybe lose, do you want that? I don't know. Only the fiercest competitor, of which all of these head coaches I would say are the fiercest competitors, would want to play any of these teams in the playoffs. Those are the teams that no one would want to face. That, for example, I'm a Michigan fan. I would prefer it outside of Ohio State because it's a rivalry game if we just never played any of those teams. Like, if we had to make a schedule for this year among the playoff participants, those teams I would choose last. And some of them I would even put on the road because I don't think Michigan could even beat them at home. That's what I talk about when I say these teams are scary and you would not want to face them. Okay, now it's time for previews. Now it's time for these previews. Enough for the chit-chat. My apologies for taking so long to get to these. Oh my gosh, but this is going to be like a 3-hour show with this many topics, and that's going to be incredible. That is going to be absolutely incredible. One more check. Just one more check for things. There's a lot of flips. Whole lot of flips. See any of the new posts? Let me see. Apparently, Will Stein might be the next head coach at Kentucky. It looks like if Satake goes to Penn State, they're not going to keep Jim Knowles. Which, I mean, I don't know where Knowles would then go. Because I still think he's one of the best defensive coordinators in America. We'll see, though. But it sounds like Satake's meeting with like BYU church elders, and they're going to try to like make him one of the highest paid coaches to keep him, which is smart. Satake's a genius. So we're gonna talk about this game right now. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna talk about BYU and Texas Tech right now. Just reading around. Let me look at the chat. Why is my chat lagging? Maybe I have too many. All right, let's talk about this. This Saturday at noon Eastern time, the Big 12 championship game kicks off between the BYU Cougars, who stand at 11-1, 8-1 in Big 12 conference play, and the also 11-1 and 8-1 in Big 12 play, Texas Tech Red Raiders. These teams have faced before, and it ended in a 29-7 blowout Texas Tech win. The spread indicates that the books are leaning towards something similar, with Texas Tech being favored by 13.5 points. Line opened up at, I believe, 11.5, 12.5, so sharps are on Texas Tech here. Game will be broadcast on ABC. Let's take a look at BYU's schedule here quickly and tell us who they are. Who BYU is a team that is scrappy. They are physical. They know how to stop the run, how to run the ball. They have a very underrated quarterback in Bear Bachmeier. And LJ Martin has been a great running back. Their trench play is fantastic. And Jay Hill is one of the nation's best defensive minds and coordinators. And Aaron Roderick, their offensive coordinator, has been there for quite some time, and they find ways to win. They're physical. Their talent is underrated. They're a top 15 power rated team, top 20 at the very worst. And from a strength of record and strength of schedule standpoint, I think this team should already be solidly in the playoffs. They deserve to get it, in my mind, over Notre Dame and Miami, because they have played a tougher strength of schedule, and the metrics bear that out. The Utah win against a very good Utah team being a big piece of that equation. For Texas Tech, dominance. You saw it early on against Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Kent State, and Oregon State. They just were not messing around, and they were super talented. And then against Utah, where they just put them in a hole and beat their face in, they showed that they're a real top 10 team. And as the season has progressed, it's become more evident, even within that loss to Arizona State, it's become more evident that they're actually top 5, more likely than not, or very close to that. Blowing out Houston, Kansas, losing close to Arizona State. They're 0-1 in close games. But then they shut out Oklahoma State, destroyed Kansas State, destroyed BYU, destroyed UCF, and shut out West Virginia on the road. This is one of the best teams in college football. I would not want to face this team in the playoffs. But BYU, with Kalani Sitake as their head coach, and with that staff and those players and the competitors they are, I know they want the rematch. And I know that Texas Tech also wants this rematch, because they want to show that, hey, we can beat a good team twice, and we can dominate a good team twice. Looking back at this game, took place on November 8th. Texas Tech had 368 total yards to BYU's 255. Both teams didn't really run the ball well, but when you take out sacks, Texas Tech had over 4 yards per carry, 149 total yards, despite BYU having 4 sacks. BYU averaged under 3 yards per carry just in general, which with LJ Martin and that offensive line is a pretty big deal. And Texas Tech forced 3 turnovers. They had 3 more first downs. They were 7 of 18 on third down, while BYU was 3 of 14. Both teams didn't have a really good day on fourth down. They were a combined 1 of 4 there. TOP was about equal, but Texas Tech with their defense was able to create plenty of short drives. They had the better offense. They had the way better defense, and that's a credit to Sheil Wood, Texas Tech's defensive coordinator, when you have players like Jacob Rodriguez, David Bailey, Romello Height, Lee Hunter. It's incredible what Tech has done on defense. We usually think of Texas Tech as college football fans as all offense and no defense, but that's not the Texas Tech of now. That was the Texas Tech of then. This is a defense that is among the nation's best, and according to ESPN's efficiency metrics and some adjusted EPA per play allowed metrics, they're actually the number 1 defense in all of college football. Some key players to pay attention to here. Same as the last matchup. Bear Bachmeier at quarterback, LJ Martin at running back, and Bruce Mitchell the center for BYU. And then John Ta'amoapua at defensive tackle, and Tanner Wall at safety, and Faletua Satuala at safety as well. That safety duo is something to pay attention to. What do they do to Brycen Moore? Do they read his eyes? Are they able to prevent big plays? Are they able to tackle Cameron Dickey well? And that running back room and Jacoby Williams. What do they do? And then for LJ Martin, does he have the elusiveness and the vision and the skill set to create a breakaway run or to break some tackles here? Because Texas Tech pretty solidly should have the trench advantage here with Romello Height, David Bailey, Jacob Rodriguez, Lee Hunter. Offensively for the Red Raiders, Howard Sampson and Jacob Ponton, their tackles, have been pretty good this year. How do they hold up in pass pro when BYU was able to get 4 sacks on Brycen Moore in the regular season matchup? Tech is second in points per play allowed. They're top 15 in points per play. BYU is 17th in points per play allowed, and I think 33rd in overall points per play. Texas Tech is the favorite here. They are the better team, but do they have the better quarterback? That's pretty fascinating. Bear Bachmeier is 12th in QBR to Morton's 30th. Both in the 70s. Brycen Moore is a 72 QBR. Bachmeier's is a 79.6. Brycen Moore is a 165.9 pass rating, which is 8th. Bachmeier's is a 144.1, which is 46th. Bachmeier is involved in the rushing attack in a way that Morton just is not, and Bachmeier can take hits more and is a healthier quarterback. Morton, 20 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. Bachmeier, 14 touchdowns to 4. 9.1 yards per attempt for Texas Tech, 8.1 for BYU. And yet, due to the injury situation, Bachmeier actually has slightly more yards. I'd say it's pretty even here. Morton, when healthy, is really good, but he also has the better supporting cast. Bachmeier is also a great quarterback, is a true freshman. They really won that trade where they let Retzlaff go very late, and Bachmeier emerged and is actually a better quarterback than Jake Retzlaff, is better for this team, and a key reason why this year they're in the Big 12 title game, and last year they weren't and lost an additional regular season game. It's an amazing story for BYU, and also for Tech, that they retained Morton, trusted in him, and he's done well. Keys to this game are rushing offense, pass protection, rushing defense, big plays allowed and forced, and the talent mismatch. The biggest one here is the talent mismatch, because Texas Tech could just overwhelm BYU with talent again, and that's done. Like, close the book. Texas Tech's the Big 12 champion. We'll see if they can win it all. Big plays defensively is going to be important for BYU to win, and it will be important for them to prevent Texas Tech from generating big plays defensively. Remember, they're a 13.5-point underdog, so we have to talk about them as if it's not likely that they're going to win, because it's not. Like, sometimes Vegas gets these things very wrong. This is not one of those instances. Texas Tech is the much better rushing defense. Pass protection, BYU is better, I would say, at that, but by how much, I do not know. And Texas Tech also has the better rushing offense, and those are the things that BYU hangs their hat on. So when I look at this matchup, I see Texas Tech, I see red, I see guns a-blazing, and I see Texas Tech winning this game pretty decisively. I see them winning. I see them covering. They won by 22 points despite having a very bad performance on offense. And the other thing, too, with BYU, keep in mind with Kalani Sitake, who I actually think is one of BYU's X factors here. I think he is a better coach than Joey McGuire. He is in conversation with Penn State and with BYU and even, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints elders and donors about keeping him. There's a little bit of off-field stuff going on with BYU, while Tech is laser focused on killing everyone and proving they're legitimate. So I would not be shocked here if Texas Tech puts on an even more dominant performance than they did against BYU in the regular season, both in terms of, film, but definitely in terms of the final score. I think there's a good chance that might happen. Didn't mean to flip that. There's a good chance. There's a good chance that might happen. So I am going with Texas Tech to win. I'm going with the Red Raiders to cover as well and dominate. I am confident through that performance and a win here that they will receive a bye and their first game in the college football playoff will be in the quarterfinals. And Texas Tech is one of those teams where I don't think anyone wants to play them because of that defensive line and the non-negotiable and the threat that it is and that it presents. Bless me. Okay, now we can talk about Georgia and Alabama, the SEC championship game. The Georgia Bulldogs, who stand at 11-1, 7-1 in SEC play, face the Alabama Crimson Tide, standing at 10-2, also 7-1 in SEC play, in Atlanta in the SEC championship game. Georgia being favored by just a minuscule 2.5 points. Game will kick off at 4 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. And the first thing that I want to talk about, that I want to bring us back to, is the past, but specifically looking at Georgia. Because Georgia preseason was talked about as a team that could not just miss the SEC championship game, but miss the college football playoff. That was a common discussion, whether it was Josh Pate, whether it was analysts. I know a lot of people on Twitter that I respect and others that I don't respect said that, Georgia could go 9-3. And, they could have. They had some close wins that could have bounced the other way, but they didn't. They didn't. And now they're playing for not just the SEC championship, but a chance at a first-round bye, and no matter what, they are getting a home playoff game. That's huge. That is huge for Kirby Smart, where with that performance against Tennessee and then the performance against Alabama, there was a lot of pessimism that, hey, Georgia might be in for a rough year here. And they just kept winning. They beat Kentucky. They beat Auburn. They beat Ole Miss. They beat Florida. Then they dominated Mississippi State, dominated Texas, load managed against Charlotte, and they've always played Georgia Tech tough. So I don't take anything away from that. They now play an Alabama team where when you look at the Crimson Tide's schedule, Alabama, after that game against Florida State, plenty of people, myself included, thought, oh yeah, Kalen DeBoer's done after this year. Well, he is not. They beat Louisiana Monroe 73-0. They crushed Wisconsin. They beat Georgia on the road. They controlled Vanderbilt. They beat Missouri. They destroyed Tennessee, escaped South Carolina, controlled LSU, lost at home to Oklahoma in a very weird game where they're definitely better than Oklahoma, but they lost the turnover battle, and that was enough to produce a loss. And then they escaped Auburn. And now, Kalen DeBoer, who was 2-0 against the best head coach in America, in Kirby Smart, gets a chance to be 3-0 against Kirby. That is insane. And how DeBoer has done it is offensive genius. He has outcoached Smart's defense in their 2 games where they've faced off. Earlier this year on the road, Alabama early on got out to a lead. They finished outgaining Georgia by 40 total yards. They had more than double the passing yards. Georgia outrushed them, but Alabama did just enough offensively, won the turnover battle, held Georgia to 0-1 on 4th down, held them to 2 of 8 on 3rd down, to where, with 25 additional first downs, with 10 minutes extra of clock, getting some pressure on Stockton, and having that key stop in the red zone, they came out with a win and snapped Georgia's, I think at the time it was like a 20-plus home game win streak. I think it might have been a 29-game home win streak, dating all the way back to 2019. Whether it was the 5 wide receiver formation that caught Smart off guard in 24, or this year it was just more so straight up Georgia's DBs had no business guarding Alabama's receivers, and they couldn't get pressure on Simpson because they struggled to get pressure really on anyone. It was just a really bad roster matchup. And then DeBoer's also a great coach who's elite in these top-end games and really plays to his competition level and then some. Some key analytics and stats here. For Georgia, they're a team that when you look at the points per play stuff, they're not overtly impressive. But we've had national champions before that aren't very impressive there. Most of them took place 2000s and before the college football playoff. With the college football playoff, you have that extra game to solidify statistics in a sample size. So you have like an additional sample usually. And you also had Saban in Alabama and other schools trying to copy his recruiting model. So it was easier to create superpower level teams in the 2000s. Now we're kind of reverting back to the 2000s where you could create superpower teams. I don't really think we can now, but there's a little bit more balance and more chaos because there isn't Nick Saban and there aren't teams completely aspiring to be him. I think Smart and Day, for example, are some of the few that are, but there's not that same comparison. There's not the same ability to lock down talent and have all Americans in your 3 deep or 2 deep that there used to be. Alabama's similar analytically. I think a big part of that is these teams have both had close wins or each have had a loss, and they also play in tougher schedules, much tougher schedules than most Big Ten teams do, than all ACC teams do, and all Big 12 teams do. Both are top 10 in FPI. Georgia is 11th in game control and efficiency, 8th in FPI. Alabama is 6th in FPI, 7th in game control, and 10th in efficiency. Alabama's given a 51.1% chance to win per ESPN's FPI, so just a slight edge given here by FPI to the Tide. They're 9th in defensive efficiency, 14th in offensive efficiency. Georgia is 12th on offense, 24th in defense, respectfully there. The quarterback matchup is important, but I got to give this to Ty Simpson. Gunnar Stockton might have definitely has a lower ceiling. In some contexts might have a higher floor, but only because of the supporting cast and the fact that he has a run game to lean on. His offense is more multiple than what Ty Simpson has at Alabama. Simpson is the better quarterback here. More passing touchdowns, fewer turnovers, averages more yards per attempt, has almost 500. Actually, yeah, he has 521 more passing yards, still completes almost 2 out of every 3 of his pass attempts, has a high QBR and a passer rating that is 151. Is he perfect? No, but he is a better quarterback than Gunnar Stockton. Despite that, though, Stockton's been ruthlessly efficient this year, high completion percentage, good QBR, good passer rating, and can be involved in the ground game. Georgia's key players here. Pay attention to Christian Miller, Chris Cole, KJ Bolden on defense. And then on offense, Nate Frazier, Monroe Freeling, Drew Bobo, Zachariah Branch, even Gunnar Stockton, but we've already talked about him. If I had to circle back to one player on defense, it would be, I don't think CJ Allen is healthy for this game, but I could be wrong. It'd be Raylan Wilson or Dalen Everett. Georgia here needs to get pressure. That's why I highlighted some of their key leaders in pressures with Christian Miller and Chris Cole. And they need KJ Bolden and Dalen Everett to prevent some big plays. They need the rest of their defense to just step up. It's improved. In the month of November, Georgia's defense has shown an edge to it that we hadn't seen for much of the year. But they need to continue that trend and probably have their best game of the year defensively to make sure they have a win here. Because Alabama's defense has also gotten better, both at stopping the run. It's become clearer and clearer. Their secondary is one of the nation's best, if not the nation's best. And we know that, Kirby Smart, he's gotten over the Alabama hump before, but it's still a hard game for him for a variety of reasons. It's also going to be a tough game for Alabama. And I'm highlighting their safeties, Bray Hubbard, Keon Sabb, and Zabian Brown, because they're going to need their safeties to plug holes in the ground game to prevent big plays and big runs. And they're explosive enough, the Dogs are, on offense now to where their passing game's not inept. They can create big plays through the air too. So I'm also highlighting these players because those 3, Hubbard, Sabb, and Brown, are probably the best players on defense. And then offensively, Jeremy Bernard, having him 700-yard receiver, their best receiver on the team, and then Huevis, their best tight end. Hopefully he's healthy. He was not healthy against Auburn. Having him would be huge. So watch out if he's healthy. If he is, with some of the encouraging signs Alabama showed in the run game, Alabama maybe should be favored here, and this could be a wrong team favored situation. If Alabama has a run game with the defense they do and the potency of the air attack that they can have, this will totally be a wrong team favored situation in my mind. Comparing the coaches for just a minute here. look at their career win-loss record. Now, I know DeBoer's includes some lower-level competition, but bear with me, because he's won at Alabama, he won at Washington, won at Fresno. Helped give the mirage that Tom Allen was a good coach at Indiana. 123-18 record for DeBoer. 116-20 for Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart, I think, is an outstanding CEO and the number one coach in football. With 2 titles nationally, 3 SEC titles. He'll be fighting for his 4th here. He's 1-4 versus Alabama. That's his only kryptonite. He has the head-to-head win over Ryan Day. He has multiple wins over Dabo Swinney. He did beat Saban in 2021, showing that he can beat his mentor, but lost to him in 2021 too, and in 2023. Really, the only bad thing about Kirby Smart is that he's not Nick Saban, but no one is. He has won so many games where he had a talent disadvantage or an injury disadvantage or a roster disadvantage when you factor in health or the fact that in 2022, Ohio State just had such a good QB and receiver room where they matched up perfectly against a shaky Georgia secondary, and yet he's won so many of those games. That's why he's the number one coach in football. But you could make the same case for DeBoer. He's 7-1 in his career versus the top 5. He's undefeated against Dan Lanning, who he has a 3-0 record against. Steve Sarkisian with a 2-0 record against him. And he has a 2-0 record against Kirby Smart. And he was the runner-up in 2024 at Washington. And Alabama is firmly in the playoffs this year. Like 10-2, with how close this spread is, with all the likely outcomes. Alabama's either going to lose close or win close. They're firmly in the playoffs with Coach Kalen DeBoer, who is among one of the best coaches in America, and along with Curt Cignetti is probably in his own category when you factor in what do they do when things aren't going their way. Some keys to the game. I would say rushing offense, 4th down play calling, because we've seen that go both ways in both of their prior matchups. Rushing defense for both squads. Alabama was able to run okay on a good Auburn run defense, and Georgia's rushing offense is really good in power situations, so who shows up better there? Then you have passing defense. That's been a weakness of Georgia's. It should be an excellent strength of Alabama's. And what about special teams? Both special teams units have been shaky, but both also have talent. Which one shows out more in Atlanta? For rushing offense, Alabama's, at 4.2 yards per carry, they're 124th. But I think much like Ohio State, they have moments where they can be better than that. And then for the passing defense component, Georgia's slowly improved there. They're much better than they were against Tennessee. I imagine they're better than the first time they were against Alabama. What they did to Texas from a pass defense angle was very impressive. Those are the keys to victory. Whoever dominates or controls more of these aspects than the other will win. And I ultimately think the game will come down to a 4th down play call. I think it will come down to a incredible key offensive decision in that regard. And this is where we get to the roster matchups and where I have to pick the winner of this game. I think from a roster standpoint, Alabama still matches up well with Georgia. I do think that Kirby Smart is a better coach than Kalen DeBoer, and to this point still in his own tier of coaches, and these overall teams are equal. But with it being DeBoer against Smart, and DeBoer has now had a track record of outcoaching him, and this year he has pretty good roster matchup edges, I am going to go with Alabama again. I've picked Georgia to win every game in the regular season, and usually have picked them to perform at a higher level than they actually did. My preseason rule of do not doubt Kirby Smart, I think, has been fulfilled in that regard. Picked them to go 12-0, they went 11-1. I think here I have kind of a right to pick against him at least once. So I'm going to do that here. If I'm wrong, then this is just another Alabama-Georgia game that I have totally misread. In fact, outside of last year, where I did pick Alabama to win and was correct, in every other Alabama-Georgia game I've predicted on this channel, I've always gotten it wrong. Always been on the wrong side. So maybe that continues here. maybe. Although if I had the time, I probably would have picked Alabama if I was able to have the time to make a repick this year. But that doesn't count. It's not on the channel. Anyway, I think Alabama wins outright because of their superior defense, and they've made some offensive improvements that I think are legit. In the same way that I'm giving Ohio State some benefit of the doubt for running well on Michigan in short yardage situations, and their backs are starting to make people miss more, I am giving Alabama credit for being able to run okay in a very impressive Auburn rushing defense. I am going to give them a lot of credit for that. So I do think Alabama wins. Obviously, they cover as they're an underdog. Do they get that first round bye at 11-2? I don't know, but they'll certainly get a home playoff game. If they lose, they're getting a road playoff game. Georgia, no matter what, is getting a home playoff game, or if they win, they're certainly getting a first round bye. Okay, last segment, everyone. Finally. Undefeated, second-ranked Indiana plays undefeated, first-ranked Ohio State. We have a game of the century here, people. 12-0 versus 12-0. 9-0 in Big Ten Conference versus 9-0 in Big Ten Conference. The spread is under a touchdown. It's the Big Ten Championship game in Lucas Oil Stadium at 8 p.m. Eastern Time at night. Ohio State's favored by 5.5, and you got Curt Cignetti and Ryan Day locking in antlers, facing off against each other. You have the two most likely per odds Heisman Trophy winners. You have amazing defenses, amazing receiver cores. You have just fantastic players at all levels. You have the coach of the year facing off against the coach who's the reigning national champion. So let's go over this matchup and talk about Indiana for a brief moment. Indiana, no matter what happens here and going forward, with maybe a rare exception because there always is, has had the most impressive coaching job of 2025. To lose as much as they did at certain positions, some at D-line, some at linebacker, some at secondary, a lot at quarterback, and a good chunk at O-line, and to get better at all of those positions is, wow, it's impressive. It's crazy. And then to go 12-0, I know Penn State was down, but they still beat Oregon on the road. They beat an Iowa team who was better than most thought preseason on the road. They crushed Illinois, a game that we famously called here on College Football with Sam. Crushed them, blew them out by 53 points. 63-10 was the final score. They have crushed, in addition to that, Wisconsin, Purdue, Maryland, UCLA, Michigan State. They controlled Oregon. They really dominated that second half, holding Oregon's mighty offense, because it was healthy then, to just 13 offensive points. They get a new test in Ohio State here. And just because this game's being played in Indianapolis does not mean it's a home game for IU. That place will probably be mostly Ohio State fans, although there will be a good portion of Indiana representation. This is a big game for the program, but it's not going to be a defining game either, where what they've done already speaks for itself. It's the same thing with Ohio State, where with the Buckeyes, they beat Texas, close win. Then they dominate everyone, get a little bit tested against Washington, but still win by 3 scores. And they just exercised their Michigan demons. They dominated Michigan, winning 27-9. This is the number 1 defense in America with the number 1 receiver core and a redshirt freshman who just set a regular season record for completion percentage. Ohio State, no matter what happens in this game, it does not define them. Like, what they have done is impressive. And in another year where Indiana doesn't go 12-0 and has the most impressive win in America, Ryan Day's coach of the year. Like, it's impressive that Jim Knowles leaves for Penn State. He hires Matt Patricia. The defense completely reloads, if not gets better. Chip Kelly leaves for the NFL, and the offense is about the same, if not in some instances a little bit better, with Brian Hartline as the first-time OC. The O-line improves, going from Justin Fry and upgrading to Tyler Bowen. Larry Johnson's unit reloads. James Laurinaitis' linebacker group, very much improved. And they play an Indiana team where, much like Ohio State's a different test for Indiana, Indiana is a different test for Ohio State. Some key analytics here. These are the unanimous top two teams. Indiana's consensus top two, because Game Control has them at fourth, and I know some other people who do not have Indiana top two in power ratings. But Ohio State's first in title odds. Indiana is second. Indiana's second in FPI. Ohio State's first. Ohio State's second in ESPN's efficiency metrics. Indiana is first. Ohio State's first in Game Control. IU's fourth. IU in efficiencies from ESPN's FPI is fifth in offense, third in defense, 12th in special teams. Ohio State's fourth in offense, second in defense, 128th in special teams. Ohio State scores 0.529 points per play offensively. That's 10th. Indiana scores 0.607. That's fourth. Indiana only allows 0.201 points per play. That is fifth. Ohio State allows 0.15 points per play. That is first. Ohio State is 11th in yards per pass attempt. They're first in yards per pass attempt allowed. And defensively, they're, I think, barely top 40 in yards per carry, but they're top 5 in yards per carry allowed. Indiana is top 15 in both yards per carry allowed and yards per carry. And they're a little bit higher, just a little bit higher in passing yards per attempt. But pass defense is a whole yard per attempt allowed higher than Ohio State's. Again, these are the top two teams in America. The power ratings agree. The metrics agree. The film agrees. The resumes agree. And these are the best two quarterbacks in a lot of instances. Now, if we're solely going off of future NFL talent, there's probably some other quarterbacks who are more talented than these two. But if we're going off of what we know right now, and if we're going off of QBR, these are probably the top two quarterbacks, or certainly two of the top 5, very worst top 10 quarterbacks in America. Sayin has the edge in yards and completion percentage, but Mendoza's 5th in completion percentage, and he has the slight edge in yards per pass attempt, the edge in touchdowns, and what Sayin is able to do more so than Mendoza through the air in statistics, Mendoza has legs that he uses to be a key part of the rushing offense. Both have passer ratings above 180, and both have high QBRs. Mendoza's is an 88.3, Sayin's is a 91.4. Let me know what you think down in the comments section below as to who is the better quarterback and why, because I think there is an argument to both. I do think that. I think that Sayin has the higher floor than Mendoza. I think Mendoza has the higher ceiling. That is where I will land with this. And of course, that factors in their supporting casts, because these teams are so good, and we've seen both without injuries both with injuries and without have ups and downs, to where I have a hard time factoring that out. So that's where I'll leave it at. I believe Mendoza has the higher ceiling. Sayin has the higher floor. Both can be an advantage or disadvantage in this matchup or in the playoffs, but neither quarterback will be the reason why they lose a game, barring something insane happening. They're both some of the best in America. Key players for Indiana: we got D'Angelo Pons at corner, linebacker Aiden Fisher, defensive end Stephen Daly, wide receiver Elijah Surratt, and center Pat Coogan. Some other players I didn't mention: the guards Bray Lynch and Drew Evans, the tackles Khalil Benson and Carter Smith, the running backs Roman Hemby and Kaelon Black, wide receiver Omar Cooper Jr., Charlie Becker, E.J. Williams. On defense, Michael Kamara actually, I think, still leads the team in pressures. You got Tyreek Tucker, Mario Landino on that D-line. You have Elijah Hardy, who I think leads the team in sacks with 7. And then Amari Farrell, Devin Boykin, and Jamari Sharp, and Lewis Moore. That's Indiana right there. All of their players are anywhere from good to elite, collegiately speaking. Ohio State obviously has more NFL talent because their players have better measurables. But we're talking about key players in this game, not key players for who are going to start on Sundays. And all of these players here, Daly, Fisher, Pons, Surratt, and I think Coogan will get their chance to start on Sundays. For Ohio State, Caleb Downs, Arvell Reese, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, and Max Clare are key players to pay attention to. Some others, and I'm going to name the whole roster again, are Bo Jackson. You also have Phillip Daniels. You have, why am I forgetting his name? Austin Sareveld, Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, Brandon Innes. You have Caden McDonald, Caden Curry. You have Will Smith Jr., Edric Houston, Sonny Styles. You have Lorenzo Styles Jr., Jermaine Matthews, Davison Igbinosun. It's a loaded team. It's the team that has the most NFL talent on its current starting roster right now, is what Ohio State has. And that's a big deal. And both of these teams and these sets of players are going to have a lot in front of them. They're going to have a test that is bigger than anything they have faced yet. Same thing with these coaches. Now, Cignetti is 0-1 versus Ryan Day, but I think we can all agree that Day is operating with much more talent. They hosted Indiana last year. That was Day's 6th year and Cignetti's first. I think we can all let that pass. Cignetti's career win-loss record, 142-37. Day's is 82-10. Cignetti is a program builder, and I think he's the ultimate game planner and overall a good game manager. 23-2 at Indiana is just so insanely impressive. I don't even know where to begin. He was the coach of the year last year, will be coach of the year this year. And in the FCS, they were the runner-ups in 2019 at James Madison. And he transitioned them to the FBS and had a lot of success with them. For Ryan Day, he's an outstanding CEO and he's a top 3 coach. I think the only coaches that are in his ballpark are Kirby Smart, Georgia, and I would actually put Cignetti there right now after the job that he has done this year. It's incredible what Day and Cignetti have both done with what they lost last year, with the fact that Cignetti does not have a whole lot of blue chip talent, and they're both 12-0 right now and playing against each other. Day is 7-6 versus the top 5. He has 2 Big Ten titles, and he has won the 2025 national championship. This is going to be a fantastic game. And as we get closer to the prediction, I feel more uneasy because both these teams, it's like, why couldn't they go undefeated and then play each other in the national championship? The Big Ten championship game does mean a lot, but you know that a playoff game would have even higher stakes than this. Some keys to this game are pass protection. Indiana allows a 10.2% havoc rate. Ohio State allows a 9.5% havoc rate. Here's how I'll put it. Ohio State's been much more stable in pass protection, and Sayin has much better feet than Mendoza. Part of that may also be the fact that, like, literally he has better receivers to throw to, so there isn't as much anxiety about making the play, but he makes it anyway. With Indiana, their highs on O-line have been much higher than Ohio State's highs. Their lows have also been much lower. They do not have the supporting cast or depth to compensate for injuries or to more easily fill them in, though they are deeper on the O-line this year than last year, where that was a huge problem against Ohio State's defense. Passing offense will be key. Which quarterback is better? Who fits the ball into tighter windows with his receivers? And who makes the it play? Who trusts his receivers more? Pass rush is a big thing here. Indiana forces an 18.5% havoc rate. Ohio State a 13.1% havoc rate. I didn't put rushing offense up here because the rushing offenses are very different. In the same way that Ohio State has a much more explosive passing attack than Indiana, Indiana just has a much better rushing offense than Ohio State. What's key here is going to be rushing defense. Ohio State's rushing defense, I think, is their most impressive part about the defense. 3.82 yards per carry allowed after losing all they did up front. They returned more at secondary than they did up front, and I would argue their front is more impressive than their secondary. And for Indiana, they only allow 4.18 yards per carry. So both awesome rushing defenses. Trademark of both of these defenses, actually, is that it's very hard to run consistently on them. And the last key is game management. Who has the superior game plan? Who executes that game plan at a higher level? Who tightens up? Who's loose? And more importantly than that, who just makes the key decisions in the right moments when the time is right? Looking at the roster matchups here, I think that staffs are pretty equal. I think that the overall teams are pretty equal. If I had to lean one way there, I'd slightly lean Ohio State for overall team and slightly lean Indiana for the staff. The rushing defense versus offense, the battle of the trenches, I would say that in terms of the ground game, that leans Indiana's way. In terms of the passing game, I do not know. Ohio State's pass blocking is very impressive, and their pass rush is like really good with 4. Imagine what it could be with 5 or 6 when they send that. Indiana, they're also good there, but there could be a talent thing. Like there could be in that regard. In the run game, I don't really think so. Indiana is like one of the best rush offense, run defense combos in America. They have an edge here. But pass rush and pass protection, I actually think, will determine more of this game. Because as we saw against Michigan, when Ohio State played their game and they won the rushing battle because they were burning out the clock. If that were a close game through 4 quarters, Michigan would have won the rushing attack, but Ohio State would have won the game because they were scoring touchdowns and were the better coached team and they played to their strengths. That's going to be important here, where Ohio State can win this game and even constrict Indiana while not having the better ground game. Time and time again, they have showcased this. And with Indiana, when it comes to the passing game, the air attack, I gotta be honest, that goes Ohio State's way. Like, they have the better receivers, they have the better secondary. In terms of quarterback, I think it's close enough to where that isn't really a needle mover. Not necessarily. So these are very evenly matched teams on paper. Super, super duper evenly matched. Ohio State has the head-to-head. Ryan Day is the head-to-head. But Indiana's team is also much better this year than last year. Ohio State, some people say, is a better team this year than last year. Maybe that's the case, but I think that's probably an unfair comparison until the end of the year. At some point, you have to make a pick. You do. And I know what my pick is. And as someone who has picked Ohio State to go 12-0, and Indiana to go 11-1, and in that one loss that I picked Indiana to have against Oregon, I still picked them to cover, which is more than a lot of people said. And I said they could win. I'm picking Indiana here to win and cover, consequentially. Ohio State is 10-1-1 ATS. And while Indiana, their ability to win is not solely predicated on that ground attack. It's not. There are more avenues for Ohio State to win dominantly than Indiana here. However, a lot of people think Ohio State's invincible, and that's kind of this common consensus after they beat Michigan. Indiana would also have destroyed Michigan if Michigan played that way. They would have. With how Michigan's D-line played, Indiana may have averaged 5 or 6 yards per carry. So, with that in mind, and the impressive job Cignetti has done, and the fact that I've seen them go into Oregon, and I've seen them win by 10, and Indiana's offensive line is healthy. It's a healthy offensive line. That's what this pick really came down to. If Indiana does not have a healthy O-line, they cannot get around Ohio State with that. If Ohio State doesn't have a healthy O-line against IU, they can get around with that. But Indiana cannot. So that's the most important position here, is Indiana's O-line, and whether or not it's healthy or it's not. It's healthy. And since this is a one-game thing and not a playoff thing, where depth here isn't going to be as important as a playoff run, I think I think Indiana's going to win. But there really isn't a wrong pick to make here. I think Indiana can win. I think Ohio State can win. There's a reason it's 5.5, and everyone that I've seen thinks Ohio State's going to win, whether it's by 3, whether it's by 10. Some are saying Ohio State's going to blow at Indiana again. And while there is a world where that happens, these teams aren't the same as they were last year. We have to see Ohio State dominate a top 10 team in FPI yet. They could in the playoffs, but until they do, we can't say this is a better team than last year's team. Indiana last year does not beat Oregon on the road by 10. This year's team did. The gap between them is closed, and I like the price that Indiana is set at, where you're getting them at plus 5.5, despite having the better special teams, having the better ground game, and having enough connection between their receivers and quarterback, and Surratt is back and healthy, to where I like their ability to move the ball and also slow Ohio State down. So I like Indiana to win outright here, and more so even just cover the spread. They will emerge victorious in a close, classic contest. And from there, I think each of these teams will win a few playoff games. And after this game, I will still say that Ohio State, probably from the talent perspective and betting perspective, should probably still be favored to win the national championship. But maybe I'm wrong there too. I think there's a very good chance that Indiana is the best team in college football, and therefore could go 16-0 and win it all. All right, that's it. We're done here. I need to get out of here. I need to get these videos up. I assume some people are going to be thrown a curveball by my IU pick, because I said early on that no matter what happens in this game, Indiana's reputation isn't ruined, and usually that's a tell that, like, oh yeah, you're going to pick them to lose. So I imagine that's a curveball. But yeah, it really came down to IU's O-line health and the fact that I think Ohio State's record ATS is more unsustainable than IU's. A team has never gone like more than 90% ATS and won a title. So either Ohio State's going to win a title, because these spreads in the playoffs will be close. They're either going to win a title, or at some point they're going to lose or nearly lose and then win a title. Indiana's like, what, 7-5 ATS? And they have the extra day of rest. I think their staff is just a little bit better. And I think Indiana's better than they were last year, and Ohio State is worse than they are last year. So that was my pick. Alabama, Georgia is just as hard to justify as Indiana, Ohio State, but I'm not as connected to that game, and I'm not as excited for it, so that's why I didn't talk about it quite as much. I think it's pretty obvious Texas Tech beats BYU, but I will see you guys very soon. Thank you for staying on for 3 hours and 30 minutes. I forgot to record this. Wow, I feel bad. Oh, it sucks. That is a pain that I forgot to record this. I can't believe I did that. I've been streaming for 3 hours and 30 minutes, and I won't be able to get these segments out until tomorrow. Gosh, that sucks. That really, really, really sucks. But, oh well. We'll get them out tomorrow. Tomorrow morning. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you